rational just means that I have a preference. Like in this context, it means I have a preference, right? And so I move in accordance with that preference, right? And you're correctly showing that preference in that moment isn't necessarily always good for us in the long term, but it is our opinion that we prove via action that it is our desire in the short term. And so we're fulfilling our desire rationally.
Do you think that there can be derived anything but historical facts in any social science? Or can social sciences derive a model which is true and accurately describes the underlying circumstance from empirical reasoning alone?
From empirical reasoning alone, right? So not from other means of, because like obviously I would.
There's some logic
obviously I
involved.
agree. No, I mean obviously I would say that praxeology, is able to accurately depict economic factors and outcomes and laws.
The point that what I would just point to is, I'm sure, like it is definitionally true that there will be bad regulations. At the same time, that does not mean that regulations are on net bad or that society is worse with them than without, right? Like the fact that some fail is not a proof that enough fail for it to be bad.
ANCAPs are not against regulation in the market. We're all for regulation in the market. We just don't want it to be done by a state entity that is lacking the same information as is the market, right?
Sure, but it's
definitionally going to be less effective than the market.
So I guess I wanted to start in like a very broad question, or two, really. First,
maybe we should start with the catalyst. Like the catalyst for the conversation, I mean.
Sure. I mean, I can pull up the tweet or whatever, but wasn't it just some monarchist guy?
Well, so no, I mean, like, I think it's important maybe for the audience that isn't aware, like why are these two talking? Why is an ANCAP and a socialist going to talk about, Austrian economic theory and compare it to, Marxist or modern monetary policy or Keynesian or, Chicago School, et cetera? Like, why is that conversation happening randomly? Yeah, I think it's important, right? So an anarcho-capitalist was just elected president of Argentina, who is like pragmatically minarchist, right? And has a fairly, I don't think it's out of the domain. I'll probably I'll probably piss off all my libertarian people, which I do all the time, but whatever. Outside of the domain to say that his coalition government is full of like some hard fucking far right motherfuckers, right? Like he's got like a VP candidate that's like, specifically gone to court for people that like may or may not have committed genocide. And it's like, and they're like, hey man, they're free. They need a right to trial. And I'm like, I mean, but you didn't have to be the one to defend them in trial. Like somebody else could have done it, but as a means of kind of like pushing out the kind of the, I don't want to get too in the weeds of like whether or not you consider Argentina's current government to be neoliberal and or socialist, because it has elements of both that I think might be difficult for an American audience or Europeans to get, because we tend to kind of have like one or the other, not like a mixture of the two. But nevertheless, pushing the left out. And then you can say it if you want to say it, but you tweeted out basically saying that Austrian economists deny empirical evidence for any. I want to get the exact wording right.
I'm gonna pull up the tweet.
Yeah.
So I said, most Austrian economists openly reject empirical evidence as necessary for economic reasoning. For example, Mises 1963 asserts that praxeology is not empirical or verifiable, and Murphy, Barnett, and Bloch 2010 claim that praxeology is akin to geometry, which therefore cannot be like proven empirically right or proven like using empirical evidence can be proven right or wrong. It can only be demonstrated or illustrated using Mises or Bloch's phrasing.
Yeah, and so then I think rightly so, but also understandably so. Libertarians kind of jumped your throat on that, being like, "Go fuck yourself," because it is a misinterpretation. I think, obviously, and at the same time, I think there is a lot to unpack there. That I think maybe libertarian people that aren't libertarians that didn't come to this political philosophy usually through Austrian economic theory might be looking at that and go, okay, yeah, that's what Mises believes. Like Rothbard, for example, vehemently disagrees on the human action as an axiom being established empirically or not, right? So he's an empiricist in the establishment of that, right? And he's the father of libertarian philosophy, right? So it's like be kind of weird to like not mention that, but I do agree with that statement, right? So I would fall into that category of most for the most, but I think it's important to delineate and break into that. And so I just wanted everybody to know about that. And I'll shut up.
Part of the reason that I said most is there are certainly some Austrian economists who like use empirical evidence and think that like they reject sort of the more openly praxeological approach. However, I would note a lot of those people basically moved into more of the Chicago school. Like they adopted the neoclassical synthesis as part of their rejection of like a pure praxeological approach. That's why people like Friedman, who is in like he's in the Chicago school, right? And he very explicitly rejected praxeology. Like he said that praxeology.
Well, okay. So I think maybe there's a bit of a problem here because there's three terms, right? And we're using them interchangeably, and they're not necessarily always interchangeable, which is Austrian, there's praxeological, and praxeological you could basically synonymize with Misesians, right? And so I would say that there are people that you would, like Hayek would be an Austrian economist, right? But he wouldn't necessarily be a praxeologist in the way that Mises is, right? But historically, he's coming, his major works are before Mises, right? And so I think Mises kind of revamps the Austrian school via praxeology, which I think obviously is in part of the reason for the Chicago school, et cetera. But I want to say that Austrianism and Misesian isn't necessarily a one-to-one there.
No, you're completely correct. Again, that's why most like Mises is a sub-school within Austrian. However, I would note that of like the broader Austrian school and even of the Chicago school and neoclassical economics more broadly, I would argue that there is an overemphasis on mathematical modeling based on a priori reasoning about rational actors, rather than empirical observation of what policies actually do, of how actors actually behave. And so like, I just want to say, I broadly perceive of this as a spectrum. In general, the further you get towards like, there's a point at which you get to like the Marxists where this isn't true anymore. But the further you go, quote unquote, left from the Austrians, the more empirical you get in a very broad sense. Like the neoclassicals, for example, simplify consumption to be a single fungible, meaning interchangeable good that you consume X donuts and it's equal to Y many units of housing or whatever. As you go further and further left, they break out consumption into multiple categories. The post-Keynesians say consumption is a bundle of like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever goods. They think in like Maslow's hierarchy of needs type stuff. And that's based on observing consumer behavior. So I would just say like there's a broad spectrum that I'm just trying to draw here. It's not just like Misesians versus like Austrians, sure. And then you get out and everyone loves empirical evidence. No, it's actually a spectrum within economics overall that like as you get further and further left, there's like a real emphasis on empirical observation.
I would just make a small caveat, right? And when I do agree, because I think empiricism has no validity in economics. Like it's, I think, and so we can get into that, and that's fine. So I do agree because it is a great defense of leftist views and horrors to utilize empiricism as a defense against rational economic philosophy. But setting all that aside, and I'm sure that's upsetting when you want to pick it apart. I just want to say small caveat. I would say you're mostly correct. The only thing is that I would say that Austrians are often talking about the same things in different ways, not necessarily not talking about those things. So when we're talking about the derivation of goods and things like that, when you start subjecting things to methodological individualism and then adding kind of like marginal utility to it, I think you are having equally complex conversations about different preferences in purchasing and consumption behavior. That is just spoken about a different way. So I wouldn't say that the Austrians are like simplified in a regard that they're not talking about those exact same economic interactions. They're just using a different foundation by which they do it. They're looking at it praxeologically and not necessarily trying to attach numerical values and mathematics to those things.
I do agree that's a different lens, and I just agree I think it's a really, really bad one. And so maybe getting to why that is, the questions that I want to ask at the opening are, first, do you think economics is a science? This one might be a simple one, but is economics a science broadly?
I think it's a social science, yeah.
And
I don't think it's a natural science, just to be clear. I think those two things are different because one is time commensurate and one isn't. Economics isn't. You can't isolate variables the same way.
Sure. So then the follow-up question would be, what do you think demarcates science from non-science? Like, what do you think would define why, say,
Yeah.
astrology is not a science, but psychology is a science, a social science?
Okay, so I would say that, so this gets really deep into epistemology, right? Because now we're going to talk about like kind of the foundation of empiricism, which, I have issues with because it's kind of contradictory. But if we're talking about like how is knowledge attained, and we look at is kind of really the question we're asking, right? Because is it attained via the scientific method? Are people utilizing the scientific method in a rigid, structured way? And so, pre Karl Popper, right, you would apply this rationale, this reasoning to verbal deduction, formal philosophy and logic, and to include praxeology, right? It would be like a social science that is, a priori knowledge, and using logic to substantiate that a priori knowledge, and then moving on. A modern conception of what is science after kind of Karl Popper's revolution, right, is baking in empiricism as an assumed thing into the question, right? Because it really deals with falsifiable statements. And so, I mean, I guess the question then becomes, well, what do you mean by science, right? And it determines kind of like what is and isn't a science then.
Okay, so without getting to the weeds of epistemology or the history of this debate, maybe let me ask a broader question. Do you think science is useful? And if so, why? What is it about science that makes it a useful thing for humans?
Well, I think that's a weird question. Yeah, I mean, I think science tends towards predictability, right? The ability to guess at the future, and that is one reason why it has functionality, right? Because if I have a 90% chance of certainty that action A will occur over action B, then I can plan accordingly for action A with a small plan B for action B. I think the second reason that it is functional and useful is that I do, and this again might upset some of the ANCAPs, I do believe that knowledge can be gained via the scientific method, that we can know things that build upon other things. I think we have to be careful about that, though, because when we use empiricism, even within the natural sciences, to do so, everything like a tree branch is based off of the previous branch that it comes from, the previous limb, right? And so we can never really truly be certain of that every limb is necessarily strong in all circumstances. There are some that are, there are some that aren't. It depends. And so oftentimes we may have layers of kind of false knowledge, if you will, incorrect assumptions based off of one poor assumption. And then if there's kind of a paradigm shift off of a much larger branch, it can change everything that we know, and can actually be, maybe somewhat harmful if it interacted against our intuition or maybe per se more functional wisdom that was like, culturally passed down. So there are instances where it can be bad. Obviously, creating the nuke might also be one too, if we want to go Ted Kaczynski on it.
Well, so the reason I'm asking in part is like just to focus on how you began your answer, and the meat of it was predictability is what's useful about science. And so like just to like formally, one of the arguments related to that is the no miracles argument, that science gives us answers that would have been miraculous to have arrived to had we not gone through the scientific method. So the idea that like we are just randomly adjusting for relativistic time dilation due to satellites' orbits every day, like every calculation, that every message we send up and come back down, that we're just guessing that, it would be a miracle. And given that we assume that no miracles like that are happening constantly, it's probably true that science is pointing us in the right direction. That's to me the general idea.
It's probably true.
So
right?
The reason
you kind of defeated your own argument, from the onset, which is that that it's not 100% verifiably true. So therefore, you kind of already agree with the praxeologists and the Austrians.
Not necessarily. So one of the distinguishing features add on is that science tends to get, or we hope that science tends to get less wrong with time. So like the physics model of Newton was a huge step over that before. And then the physics model of Einstein was a huge step over that before. But Einstein's step up from like Newton wasn't to disprove Newton. It was to reduce the wrongness of Newton, so to speak.
Well,
so I'm bringing up this
I don't
argument.
want to get. Maybe that's not the greatest example. Maybe we should use less controversial things like Newtonian versus Einsteinian physics. I don't because I don't want to get into a debate about it because I think Newtonian physics are more correct more often in the domains that they are, and that Einstein's really just kind of adding additional domains. So it's not necessarily proving wrong Newtonian physics. It's simply adding domains, and so maybe things that are like less controversial, like water is wet or something. You know what I mean? Like if we can keep it to that, so that we can focus on the discussion about empiricism versus like getting into a debate about physics.
So sure, without getting to the details, the reason why I'm bringing all this up is that, to me, it seems pretty clear that the usefulness of science derives from its ability to be tested or falsified, however you want to phrase it, in some way by like observation. So in physics, that's very obvious. Like the early astronomers were falsified by saying, hey, there's going to be a planet here. No, there isn't. Or there's going to be a planet here. And then they weren't wrong. And they weren't wrong over and over and over again until we think, yeah, there's probably a planet there. That was how like we derived the existence of, was it Neptune, by the gravitational like fluctuations in other planets.
Halley is probably the more miraculous or not miraculous kind of thing, being able to accurately predict exactly when a comet would return. And you kind of get rid of the doomsday predictions.
The reason I'm bringing this up is that, like, in relation to stuff like the no miracles argument, if you think that science is approaching the truth, or it has some method for finding the truth, then the question I was trying to get at before is like, well, it's useful because it predicts things well. But why does it predict things well? Is it simply because we're making logical derivations? Or is it because we're able to throw out observations which are contradicted by reality? Because to me, that seems to be like what we're getting to the key of Austrian economics. Like,
so the problem is again, there has to be a differentiation made between natural sciences and social sciences here, right? And that's kind of, I think that's really the crux here, is that you keep utilizing natural sciences as an argument, right? And so the methodological dualism is a corner piece, right, to Austrian economic theory. It specifically states that there is a large difference between viewing things where constancy can be maintained, and in sciences where constancy can't be maintained, right? So in the natural sciences, I can repeat an experiment. I have a repeatable experiment, right? Where I can, isolate, some mineral and subject it to some form of chemical reaction in a safe lab, without anything else involving. Now, you can't ever perfectly do that, right? You can't, there is kind of a gradient as you expressed, right? And also like an asymptote towards truth, right? Where like, you're never kind of like perfectly hitting the scientific fact. You're just kind of like getting more accurately closer and learning more things that might make the equation even more complex and open your eyes, but that's okay because we're learning new things, we're discovering new things via that. And that's awesome. But the problem is that when you attempt to do this towards human action, right? Human action is not a constant. You can't say, other than like at a verbal deduction, all other things being equal, right? Like you can't actually experiment in that way. And even if you could, it would likely be unethical, right? It would have to be some insane, like it would have to be like beyond torturous. With like 1 million brain signals fried so that only one brain pathway exists in a basement somewhere.
So we both agree that social science is not one-to-one with natural science. It's not as easy to pull off an experiment because there's more variables at play. At the same time, what I'm trying to point to as well is that, like, one of the revolutions which has shifted economics left in the last 30 years, like pretty substantially left, is the credibility revolution, which has been a huge rise of looking to quote unquote natural experiments and looking to like pseudo or quasi experiments. So for example, a lot of programs nowadays get rolled out in a random or lottery fashion, and we observe what happens to those who get it versus those who don't. Now that's not a perfect experiment, but we're getting like really close to being able to isolate like down to a very small number of variables and say, how does this policy affect this person? And to me, being able to look at that and say, hey, was my economic theory right or wrong is really key. If that experiment predicts things, like concludes
you can't know
things,
that. It doesn't conclude those things, right? It does a good job of guessing. I think maybe like so I was trying to think of like an analogy that like would really like maybe elucidate the way that we're viewing and speaking about it, because it seems like it doesn't actually seem like there's that huge of a difference, at least from normal people. Like, I would say that, you know, I would say that empiricism often is a bad shield, and you know, I have a lot of issues with it. But I think most people kind of get what we're saying if they, but it's so wordy, and it's so kind of like, I don't know, like ostentatious and like kind of over the top and ridiculous, right? That it's like it's hard to communicate what it actually is that we're actually saying. So the way that I view modern economic experiments, right, is I kind of view them like Chat GPT, which is that they're like natural language processors, which is they gain information and then they look for mathematical patterns. And then they do things with them in different calculations and play with the numbers and isolate different variables and different graphics. And they look at the predictability of those things. And they get better and better and better and better at creating more and more complex systems until you get to a point where Chat GPT or behavioral economics study, you know, B2A, whatever, right, is more accurate at being able to give you information that is helpful in your life than would a random person on the street, right? Like if I ask a random person on the street a question about, you know, anything, and then I ask it to Chat GPT, the random person on the street probably has no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. And Chat GPT is pretty likely to give me an accurate answer that is true. And so what the Austrian says is that's fine. And if you want to use that to gamble on the future, you know, based off of these percentages that you believe are getting closer and closer, there's only two problems with that. Number one is the hot shot fallacy, because you haven't actually established anything other than a historical fact. You haven't actually established a pattern. It just appears that way. And B, the second one, is that you can't say Chat GPT always gives factual information. Sometimes Chat GPT just says random dumb shit, but it's a pattern that's pretty good at it. And if that falsifies things that we know to be axiomatically true, then ChatGPT is wrong and I'm right. There.
So I want to respond in two ways. The first is that I think most left economists, outside maybe some insane Marxists, would say that economics is not an absolute truth. They would never try and tell you that everything our theory predicts must be true. There is no possibility for error, because they also think, hey, this is a social science. Like, yeah, my data could be wrong. Yeah, my theory could be wrong. That's, I think, one of the differences I would draw.
Oh, I'm aware, for sure. Yeah.
Well, and so I'm just trying to say, to me, that's an important difference, because I think any social science which claims absolute certainty is probably wrong. Like social scientists who claim they've solved how humans think or how humans behave, sociologists or psychologists, I instantly, those are usually cultists.
Doesn't do that. Austrianism doesn't do that either.
So the second point I would point to is, how do you know whether your axioms are correct in a broad sense? And how do you know whether the deductions you're deriving from them are correct without being able to ascertain whether what they claim actually observes? Like, what I'm trying to get at is this: you don't choose your axioms, presumably, you don't choose your axioms randomly. You're trying to choose them to make a system which is good at predicting the world. Without getting like too esoteric, we chose the axioms for math. The ZFC axioms and the iterations on them were literally chosen to make math work for the purpose of understanding our world. We didn't just like get them from the ether. We chose the axioms of math.
Maybe is you could say that you chose them, but you could also say that you logically derived them from previous axioms, and that some of those axioms may have been, it's hard to know for sure, but some of those axioms math might exist correctly in independent of our rationality, and that our rationality was able to deduce rational laws of mathematics later. So that those things might actually be axioms that we didn't necessarily choose, we discovered, and that they exist independent of our thought, but that yes, via language we named them, or we gave them a certain structure, because there's different ways to do math, right? Like you could do it by 12. So that's how most humans used to do it. Is by 12 as opposed to tens.
The axioms here are literally, okay, well, we can't get into this without getting to super weeds, but the axioms
I'm okay with going into weeds.
I'm just debating about whether math was discovered or or is a social useful tool like science is like way beyond the
I
context.
keep telling you to bring up non-controversial things, and you're like the discovery of physics and math, and I'm like, these are big concepts. Like, just go with like, this bowl is ceramic. You know what I mean? Like do simple shit.
Sure.
This cup. This cup is my cup.
Pulling back a bit, the economics axioms that most of us like take to be fundamental. Like, I don't actually think that post-Keynesians take any axioms to be fundamental. They have certain beliefs they think to be true, but they don't think that everything derived from those beliefs is necessarily correct. So what I'm trying to draw is like, first, the contrast between an axiomatic approach, a deductive approach, and a more empirical one. And second, I'm trying to stress, like, you don't choose axioms out of the void. There are some, like Ayn Randians, who will claim that you can derive, like, basically that humans are rational actors from identity axiom. None of them have ever actually done the derivation because it's not possible to do so. But
what do you mean, like, it's not possible? What does it mean it's not possible?
It is not possible to go from A equals A to conclude that humans are like actors who act on the purpose, and those purposes are rational for their self-benefit, etc., in any way which would lead you to useful economic conclusions. Like, hey, the state intervening to impose a minimum wage law is bad, and you drive it all the way back and it comes to A equals A. Like that is not possible, and they've never done it.
What do you mean they've never done it? People do it all the time. Like you.
I have asked this repeatedly. No one ever gets the derivation.
Right, like, so you get to the law of identity, right? Which is A equals A, right? And then from there you have to substantiate. Like, I'm not going to do the whole thing now because it takes like an hour, right? But like, you go from there to the 3 Aristotelian laws of formal logic, right? Like law of excluded middle, and then there.
But that is equivalent to claiming that by just the laws of logic you can derive all human action. So like, again, we're just starting with like, hey,
what do you mean by derive all human action?
Well, the claim that you want to arrive at is the action.
Humans act.
Yeah,
humans act purposefully.
But that is like a worthless assumption without knowing whether that purposeful action is like, without giving it a moral loading and without being able to observe whether that action.
It's not worthless because it's a basis of praxeology. It's a basis of Austrian economics. I mean, I'm sure you think it's worthless, but
so let me point to an example here. The fact that humans act does not imply that those actions are like good or bad, economically useful or not useful. You need to add additional loading to that. For example, like the classic economic term would be rational. Humans act in their self-interest in a way which tends to help them or help society. Those are things you cannot derive from the laws of logic.
I think you're misinterpreting the way that they're saying that. I think you're misinterpreting what you mean by rational actor and like helpful, right? So praxeology is not based upon a moral prescription of human action, right? What it is saying is that man acts, and that man acts purposefully to gain some form of, shall we say, psychic profit, right? So I have the three conceptions. Come on, let me get through this, because it is, if we're trying to understand Austrian economic theory, right? If you're not trying to understand, you're just trying to debunk it, we can move into debate bro mode. But like, I'm just explaining this, and then I'll let you continue with the interrogation. But it is a wrong way of assuming it. And so there's 3 actions. There's uneasiness. Man feels some form of uneasiness, right? Man is hungry. Man has a desire for something.
But
man
how do you know
bored.
this? No, how do you know this from? How do you know that people are hungry from the laws of logic?
Well, so the way that you would actually do it is backwards, right? So you can't argue, right? Again, this is where it comes into unfalsifiable statements, right? It's like, you can't argue against human action being a purposeful behavior without engaging in purposeful human action, right? Like you're engaged in a contradiction when you attempt to say that man does not act or not act intentionally, right? The only way that you could could circumnavigate that question, right? And this is me trying to be super charitable, right? I'm giving you the bullets to shoot me with, is that you could deny all forms of choice and free will, and say that man is not free, man has no free will, man has no ability to choose, that choice is an illusion, and that everything is deterministic, which is the empiricist kind of the strongest kind of piercing that the empiricist attempts to use at the very basis of Austrian economic theory, right? Which is human action.
Determinism is true, but like, even if we like reject compatibilism or whatever, we say free will does or does not exist. The argument I'm trying to get at is that like you don't know that people are hungry from the laws of logic. You do not know anything about human behavior from the laws of logic.
Hunger is an example. It's not. I mean, I can know that people will get hungry if they don't eat, right? Like, unless of course there's
not from the laws of
medical unless there's some medical intervention of some sort. But you don't. But see, that's the problem, is that empiricism also has the same basis that praxeology has. Like at its core, empiricism requires the same logical leaps that does praxeology, because empiricism can't be falsifiable. You can't falsify empiricism, because to do so would be a contradiction, right? So it is based upon the same logic that you use to derive the validity of empiricism, is the same logic that you would do to derive any other form of epistemology that has axioms, right? Like empiricism doesn't have a special axiom that's like immune to the same critiques that you would utilize against the Austrian. So any argument that you use against me for the basis of that, you would also have to equally test against and say it shows why empiricism itself is wrong. Like, it's kind of a silly argument to say.
So, like, again, this would go back to like the Munchausen trilemma. And so at some point you are just choosing like your method of trying to escape from the fact that you can't know anything. But what I'm trying to get at more specifically is like, let's assume that you've picked some way of knowing things.
Exists, bitch. And from there, we can derive human action, you know. But continue. I mean, it's fine.
You can't derive anything from like you could literally assume that everything you're observing right now is actions in a vat, that like hunger isn't actually real. God has hooked you up to an experience machine, and everything you observe is just for a simulation, right? Like you can't actually
like it kind of goes to like, right, like we could go back to philosophy 101 and be like, you know, have that whole like, you know,
from an academic skeptic perspective, you can't,
you know, kind of
from an academic skeptic perspective, you can't know anything. But I'm just trying to say, like, for the purpose of the conversation, let's say we've accepted one of the three ways of getting out of the epistemology spiral, and we get up to like knowing things. The thing that I'm trying to get at is that, like, for me, a standard scientific way to approach anything, like sociology, would be observe people and then see how things change when their circumstances change. So like, this is fairly simple to do with stuff like say psychology and antidepressants. You give people antidepressants, you see how they change afterwards. Yeah, there's a lot of other variables. You do your best to control for those, or you try and do it in a randomized control experiment, etc. And so I'm just trying to say that, like, to me, for sociology, you start with the observation and then you work backwards. You aren't working up from the axiom up to human behavior. You're starting from human behavior and working down to why.
Why is that more invalid?
Because you can't observe the axiom directly.
But you've already admitted that empiricism itself is based upon the same shaky foundation that is praxeological science. What you're saying is that it's okay with empiricism because it's falsifiable, right? Which is to say, empiricism is true because I believe empiricism is true, right? The assumption that falsifiability of something is more true than something that is logically derived is an assumption that empiricism is true, and you've already admitted that empiricism has the same grounding problems as does praxeology. So it's a bad argument.
Let me try and explain this. So let me. Currently, we're doing in my worldview, we're doing a 3-step. We start from making some basic assumption on how to get knowledge. From there, we observe society. From the observation of society, we derive a model. So that's the 3-step. You start with like knowledge. We can get it. However, we go up to society exists and I'm observing it. And then we go down to our model. What I'm trying to get at is that you don't actually start with the axioms that like humans are hungry or whatever. That is an observation. You've already done the 3-step. But then in addition to your 3-step, you have said that, hey, the thing underlying my model is this axiom. You've actually worked back down as well. You've just worked back down to a point where you start calling something an axiom. That's the argument I'm trying to give. So in fact, the entire worldview is based on the same problems that mine is, but takes additional steps.
It does not take additional steps. That doesn't make any sense. Like you're just positing that I'm thinking about something in a way that I'm not thinking about it, and then saying therefore that makes you right. That's silly. Like I'm not creating steps and then working backwards to get back to human action, right? Like you.
Then how did you know that people were hungry, right? Like how did you know that it was something you needed to explain in your model?
Right. So what you're saying is that because you viewed reality, right, and that reality has kind of like a state of falsifiable and unfalsifiable, or you could say like I think like what is it, synthetic or acute or something is like, I don't remember the exact terms. Regardless, right? You're saying you viewed reality and then you placed reality back onto your model, right? And that this is somehow unique to praxeology, but it's not unique to empiricism, because empiricism utilized looking at reality and then plugged that back into their model. Like, I fail to see where you're differentiating between the two.
Because so
And I'm trying to understand legitimately. I am listening. Like, I'm not just trying to like debate you. I want to get like a better, stronger explanation from you.
Because in addition to all the steps of deriving the model, my claim is that you have the model, and then you are claiming that a part of that model is a foundational knowledge, and then re-deriving the model from that. In essence, you wouldn't know that you needed to explain things like human self-interested behavior unless you had already observed it. Like, you're already doing the 3 steps that I'm on. You're
so
additionally...
This is Rothbard's argument. This is Rothbard's argument that human action is something that we empirically know. I disagree with it, and that's fine. If you agree with Rothbard, the father of libertarianism, as a means of how human action is established, is that it is empirically established by looking at your environment and realizing that humans act, and realizing that it's impossible to argue against the fact that humans act, because doing so would require human action, right? Like, it depends on which argument you want to take from that, but that's fine.
The disjunct here is not between whether humans act, it's why so the Austrians aren't, the disagreement between mainstream econ and Austrian econ is not whether people act. The disagreement is about the types of actions they take and whether those actions are rational, in short.
Yeah, you're talking about the different derivations between theories that you get, moving beyond the original branch, which is interesting, because I thought a socialist would just focus an attack on human action, but I'm actually really happy we're going into other branches. It's nice. So you're saying I can't know that humans are hungry. I can't know that I'm hungry unless I experience hunger. And because I experience hunger in reality, thus it must be in the domain of empiricism, because it is true or false that I'm hungry.
It's not that it's in the domain of empiricism. It's that you already went through the steps of, like, epistemologically, you already went through all the steps required to get to empiricism, and then went through additional steps to assume, hey, this final conclusion I've arrived at is an axiom of human behavior. It's like why people are acting. It explains why they make the decisions they do. Because if
but I don't see, you keep saying I went through these steps and then I arrived at that, but you're not saying how I went through those steps, right? I'm saying that as a rational actor, as a human, without any language, right? Like a toddler with no memories, right? I begin acting forthrightly in the world. It is an innate part of developing a consciousness. It is a part of the law of identity. I identify the world and I differentiate A from B. A equals A. And I begin to see and map my reality in such a way as a rational actor. And I have goals. Before I have a language, before I have a formal logic, I am already a human actor that is hungry, that is doing these things. So can you explain the logic for that, please?
Yes. Do you think there's a difference between... Do you think there's a difference between observing your own sensation of, like, your own body and observing, like, a society and concluding that the people in that society have observations like yourself of their own body? Like, do you think there's a step there?
So theory of mind is something we tend to develop right around. It depends upon, IQ and things like that. Yeah, theory of mind occurs where you transition from your own, because you start with yourself. You start with I and all these things, and then you eventually begin to realize that other people are independent individuals, and you have to treat them as individuals. It's not until we start getting commie garbage that we start to treat people as collectives instead of individuals, like Austrians do.
So that's actually maybe a crucial distinction.
Right.
I think there's a difference between you being an individual and you thinking that you understand how an individual works because you are an individual. You're assuming others work the same way, and therefore understanding how society works. Because, in short, society is not merely a collection and addition of individuals, but has emergent behaviors from that. It is not simply, like, in short, maybe one of the big differences between more left theories and more right theories is that more right theories treat society, like, literally mathematically, as a collection of individuals who have usually homogenous preferences, make similar actions for similar reasons, and left ones do not. They make a lot of heterogeneity assumptions, meaning people are very different, they act for different reasons, make different choices. And as a result,
are you familiar with systems theory in sociology?
No.
Okay, so systems theory is very close. I think you would like it a lot, right? As a lefty, right? I think you should definitely, like, I can't think of any of good authors off the top of my head, right? But I mean, systems theory is kind of like a
Oh,
more
systems.
left-leaning systems. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were saying a guy named Systems. I was like, who the fuck is that? Sorry.
No,
okay.
no. Systems theory, right? So I mean, like the most basic concept of systems theory, like at its like most basic, right, is that individuals are a kind of like a part of a collective. So there's an individual and then there's a collective, and that the collective kind of has an influence, a sociological influence, a kind of like a power. It's a kind of a branch of critical theory and power dynamics, right? In that there's like the people, if you will. They have a kind of a cultural push or shift that moves institutions, and vice versa. Institutions kind of have that same thing. So the people in America, for example, might have pushed the Catholic Church, especially after John F. Kennedy, to Anglicanize and go towards more English model and move away from Latin. And at the same time, we could argue that the Catholic Church might have had an influence on conservatives' opinions for pushing towards abstinence, even though it's not really evidence-based, right? And so I completely agree and understand that people are individuals, right? And those individuals also are parts of collectives, and those collectives have influence amongst each other, and those collectives influence other institutions that have other factors, and vice versa. And this is actually a foundational part of Austrian economics.
How?
We invented intersectionalism, 80 years before any of the left ever did, by understanding that demographic groups that are being studied, that it's problematic to do so in collectivist ways. We have to go down to individual behavior because we recognize that that individuals belong to an intersection of multiple different categories and domains. So if you try and isolate veterans, what you end up with female veterans and black veterans, and you end up with veterans that are Muslim and veterans that are atheists and like all of these different things. And so we recognize that intersectionality, as we invented it, like long before the feminists ever or the lefties ever did, we understood that it was problematic to do that, and that is part of the reason for methodological individualism. And methodological individualism is not denying that people belong to collectives. It's saying that if your knowledge is required that a collective action or group take place, that it becomes watered down in its predictability, and it becomes watered down in its truth claim, both because it's impossible to isolate all of those things.
I will agree it's impossible to isolate every collective. I would just note that there are literally neoclassical socialists who can make a very similar argument that you have to start from individual, but then you build up a collective theory from there based on micro foundations. This is not like a uniquely Austrian insight, is all I would say.
Yeah, but, I'm just fucking with you a little bit, all right? It's not a new idea. Intersectionality is not new in any domain, really. It's just what
I would be pointing to is that for stuff like groups and how groups act, it's impossible to know without observation of the world. That is, again, not a thing that you can derive from pure reason. You cannot know how veterans will act from pure reason. From the laws of logic, you cannot derive that veterans will act this, that, or the other way. Will veterans be more conservative, more liberal, is not derivable from that law of identity.
But it's also not derivable from empiricism either.
It is observable. It doesn't have to be derivable.
No, it's not.
Those are different things.
Yeah, but the problem is that you only establish a historical fact. You don't actually say that this is true in time. You only say that this is true at a specific time.
You said earlier that you think economics is. You said earlier that you think economics is a science. What do you think the nature of social science is? It is
the nature. What do you mean by nature? I don't want to get into the essence. You know what I mean? What do you mean specifically? So that I'm
why is social science useful? Same reason as science in general, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said it the same way, like I said earlier, and also, in the same way that I said that ChatGPT is useful, right? ChatGPT is when I described it, and I said that I think that modern economics is like ChatGPT. Do you think that I think that ChatGPT is useless? I think it's amazingly useful.
But what you said is that you think it's less truth apt. It is less likely to arrive at a true conclusion than a pure formal derivation. And what I'm trying to get at with all of this is that it's not actually clear to me that even on principles like these, even if we accept stuff like the action axiom, that we would still take pure praxeology and pure derivation and not simply graft it to a bunch of theories of hey, let's take empirical observation of sociology. Let's take empirical observation of XYZ human behavior, and let's just graft those on to humans act, and this is how they act. Here's our observation of how they act, which is, again, kind of how you arrive at more left theories. Like, yeah, people act. Let's observe how they do it. Let's observe that they do it in, say, class-based ways, which you couldn't derive from pure logic. And because of those,
the problem is, so like, if it seems like you're saying, okay, you accept the axiom that man acts, or at the least you're willing to accept that axiom, right? Because you don't think that it leads to anything else. But if we accept that man acts, right, then we accept choice. We accept, right? If we accept that man acts, that man intentionally makes behavior and or doesn't do behavior, right? So like an inaction is a choice, right? Then we recognize that there is choice, and we recognize that men or women, like when I say men, I mean man, right? I mean in like the kind of the old way, weremen, wifmen, if you will. That's why they're werewolves, because it just means a masculine human wolf. I want to bring back whiff. I want to bring back whiff for women. I'm just saying. All this Wimex and shit, and I'm just like, hey man, it was already in the language. You could have just gone backwards in time. But anyways, so man acts, right? And man acts via choice. And so when you accept the axiom of human action, then you have to accept the action of choice, unless you can find some falsifiability with that. And then if we accept choice, then we move into psychic profit and psychic loss, which is that, well, can you refute if we're choosing that man is choosing to do something that they prefer? Does man ever choose things that they don't prefer? And that's kind of, if I've yet to find anybody that can refute that, right? You could say that they're crazy, that if they had better knowledge, they might, or if they weren't like mentally unstable, if they weren't, drunk, or they weren't subdued in some capacity, that they may have made a different choice. But in the time, right, because time is super important here, in the moment of the choice, they made a choice that it is that they prefer, right?
Yes.
And so then we can move from there to value scales, right? So we can recognize that there are multiple things that man wants, and that there's scarcity in the world, and there's scarcity in time. And so a man has to choose based off of the things that they prefer, that they value more, right? So I'm hungry and I want a slice of pizza, and someone bought pizza at the pizza party, and there is cheese pizza and there's pepperoni pizza. And I've been told I'm only allowed to have one slice of pizza. Right? Or we can even add marginal utility to this and say that I could have 2 slices of pizza, but the second slice of pizza is not going to be as satisfying as the first slice of pizza. So I choose the pepperoni pizza, right? Because I prefer pepperoni. I value pepperoni pizza more than I value cheese pizza. So now we can establish logically, right? We can establish from those deductions, from human action, that man has choice, that those choices are designed towards their own preferences, and that those preferences are in a scale, and that scale can be ordered. Then we get to supply and demand, and then we get to things like minimum wage laws. And we can prove that Paul Krugman is full of shit, and that it's logically impossible for him to say that minimum wage fucking increases, the amount of jobs in the labor market, or doesn't have a downward pressure on competition in labor.
Here is where the logical gap occurs, because this is what I was trying to get at before. I think that you are right, that you can
just
derive.
Getting annoyed, so I just went slow. I sped it up to the end point, right? You can make the jumps there.
No, but even when you get there, even if you went slower, the jumps would still occur. I think that you're correct, that you can use laws of logic plus some observation to arrive at the conclusion that people make choices in line with their preferences. However, the fact that you know that does not therefore make you conclude stuff like, hey, laws of supply and demand are socially optimal, for example, right? The fact that people make choices like these do not mean that those choices are optimal for themselves or for society, if we have some sense of morality beyond that which is preferable in the moment. So as an obvious example, it is preferable in a moment for a heroin addict to take heroin.
I think we're moving out of Austrian economics into libertarian philosophy, which I'm fine with, right? Because the two are often strongly correlated, and we can go into that. But I think you're starting to move out of
economics is inextricable from morality, like bluntly. The whole point is to try and derive a socially optimal allocation of resources in a scarce world.
Yeah, that's, and I mean that is Mises's claim at the end of it, anyways, right? But he's not really a libertarian.
That is like,
well,
I'm saying that's not even just Mises's claim. The claim that economics is trying to derive the best outcome in a scarce world is basically every type of economics.
I mean they're trying to solve the problem of scarcity and how to allocate resources. Yes. In a way, yes, I'm fine with that.
So what I'm trying to get at is that the fact that that scarcity exists, that like people have preferences beyond maybe that can be fulfilled, does not therefore incline you to believe that all of people's preferences are better than those that could have been those imposed upon them, for example, by the state. If a person might prefer to pay their employee less, that does not therefore imply that that is a socially optimal preference. That does not get logically derived at any point here. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. It's a different conversation, right? Like we have to branch out. We have to go into different places once you start making wildly different claims or asking wildly different questions, I should say, maybe to be as fair as possible to you, right? Like obviously we have to use different arguments and go down different branches and things like that. I obviously disagree that and of course, as a libertarian, I wouldn't necessarily always immediately have these ethical arguments starting from a presupposition of Austrian economic theory. I mean, like we can go that way, right? But I would usually start with the non-aggression principle, right? Like I would usually, once you start talking about stealing from people and forcing non-consensual relationships on people because you prefer a state that violates human consent and the consent of people's wills and bodies, that like I usually goes that as a violation of the non-aggression principle, as seen through argumentation ethics, and it's it's a violation of natural law, and that it's a performative contradiction for you to even claim that you could morally justify those things, right? Like this is a totally separate debate about ethics as opposed to that. But if we want to go, I guess, from an economic perspective,
before we get like deep into the ethics weeds, what I'm trying to say is that like at the heart of economics is a moral claim. It's not the claim that it solves all of morality, but it's the claim that it solves one important moral question, which is trying to give people as many resources as possible. In short, that is like the claim of virtually all economic theories, is that they have some setup for society that gives people more ability to fill their preferences, to fill their consumption needs, etc.
So I would say from your perspective, I totally understand that position, and I get where you're coming from. From a libertarian perspective or from a right-wing perspective, economically right-wing perspective, that isn't necessarily the case. You're going to find disagreement amongst libertarians and others, right? Especially with like the Randians, the hardcore Randians, you're going to find them like vehemently agree with you, right? That capitalism is the most moral system and that private property is a moral system. And I think, you're probably right that the negation kind of necessitates the positive, right? So by saying that violating private property rights is unethical, I kind of like make an ought claim about its refutation. So I kind of get what you're saying, but I will say that there is still some disagreement about just the economics of the proper allocation of resources, as such, because the right doesn't necessarily value or necessarily believe, myself obviously included, in positive rights, right? So like what is like the idea that people have enough resources is a strong moral claim for the left and isn't necessarily a value or a moral claim of the right. See what I'm saying?
Sure. I understand that the moral like goals of what is socially optimal are different. And that's sort of, again, a little bit outside the context of the discussion. But even staying like within the bounds of the discussion.
I mean, even the discussion, but it's fine. Well, we can move on from it. It's a kind of esoteric way of looking at it, which is fine.
What I want to focus on, like the chain of logic so far is we start with like A equals A, derived laws of logic. We get down to people have preferences because they probably act in a way that satisfies those preferences in the moment at least.
Always act. They always do so. It's impossible for them not to do so.
And the question then becomes, how do we get from there to individual actions are in some way rational? How do we get from preferences to like the individual's action is not worth, like, because again, it's very hard to get away from the moral loading here. But what I'm trying to get at is that the fact that people act on preferences does not mean that they act in a way that most of us would consider rational. 99% of those watching would probably take some action to stop a heroin addict from taking heroin, even though in the moment it is in line with their preferences.
Yeah. So that's the thing is that you're asking a question for me to compare the colloquial understanding of rational versus the kind of the economic and understanding of rational, right? Because rational just means that I have a preference. Like in this context, it means I have a preference, right? And so I move in accordance with that preference, right? And you're correctly showing that that preference in that moment isn't necessarily always good for us in the long term, but it is our opinion that we prove via action that it is our desire in the short term, and so we're fulfilling our desire rationally.
Sure, but like again, this is one of the things that's to me as like a leftist, it's not controversial to say people generally act to fulfill their interests, their desires, whatever. The question is simply why are those desires inviolable to such a degree? Because like again, this is where we go to the next step. Like beyond. So
I'm sorry, what was the word you used? You said invaluable,
inviolable. So
okay, okay. I just want to make sure. Okay, yeah.
Okay, maybe let me ask a point of agreement here. Would you agree that the logical deduction cannot go further than the scale of preferences and cannot conclude things like rationality or social optimality? That because of addition of morality and because of the addition of self-interest, which might be socially unoptimal or even personally unoptimal, that we cannot derive from the scale of preferences economic theories beyond that say, hey, this individual action is like rational for themselves and rational for society, meaning self-interested for some definition of self-interest.
I wouldn't support that at all. No.
Okay. How do you think we cross the gap?
So first of all, the first problem is I'm not going to make claims about the impossibility to use logic to deduce things that I might not even currently know. Right. So that would just be a silly thing to do, to say it's impossible to logically get to something just because I can't get to it right now. That would be number one. And then number two, I would say that, you may have to use other theories that are based similarly in logic, such as the non-aggression principle, such as libertarian philosophy. But I would say within combination that also is grounded in formal logic and grounded all the way to existence exists. And so I would say that you could absolutely, you couldn't. So one of the big parts of Austrian economic theory is subjectivism, right? And so like when talking about individual action, like what is those preferences and things like that, we recognize that, preferences change second by second by second, minute by minute by minute. Right? Like what the value of everything is subjective, right? Like obviously labor theory of value, like that shit was destroyed in the 1800s, right? And so like we understand from multiple things, from marginal utility and subjectivism, that the value of things is constantly changing. And so when you're talking about like larger systems, what we can logically do, again, I would have to reiterate, and I know I'm long-winded and I seem to be upsetting you because there's like multiple things you want to say. And I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
Dog, it's all good.
No. I just like, it seems like you're ready to jump in and I like can't stop fucking talking, and I'm not trying to be that way. I am trying to be genuinely like whatever, but also I'm trying to like make my point and make it clearly. So I apologize for being wordy, and I am trying to give you time, and let me know if you need more time, like if I'm being too much. But so what I would say is that like, when I lost my train of thought there for a second, but we're back. Right. I would say that like, to reiterate is that like by saying that certain things are unethical, right, the domain that is left of what is ethical can be shown to be true, but that doesn't necessarily imply an ought. So the ought not doesn't necessarily imply an ought. It just says that the ought must be contained in the domain of everything that isn't already shown in the ought not, right? Does that make sense? So it's like, I wouldn't know, like convergence theory and objectivist philosophy, we may be able to get to those places where we can actively say that these things are the morally correct systems derived further on, but I don't know that I'm there.
So let me ask maybe a point like this. Are you a moral objectivist? Do you think that it is possible by the laws of logic to cross the is-ought gap, and that's how you arrive at the non-aggression principle? Or is the non-aggression principle derived from an axiom that you choose, like you do not want to aggress on people? Is it axiomatic, or is it like foundational?
It's found like so your question has some assumptions that are incorrect, but I understand where you're going with this, right? So again, morals and ethics aren't necessarily the same thing, right? And this is what I was kind of explaining, right? Like a moral ought is not the same thing as an ethical ought not, right? So ought not aggress upon people, right? So to give you a great example, like a really controversial example, right? Dog fucking, right? Dog fucking is gross. It's evil. I don't want these people around me. I think they're horrible people, right? I want to know who they are so that I might never accidentally have them as babysitters for my children, right? But I'm not allowed to act aggressively and make a claim via the non-aggression principle, right, that they're aggressing, unless of course I become like an ethical vegan and change my thoughts on consciousness, right? So I don't necessarily believe that dogs are moral agents or moral agents or actors. Some species maybe, right? We can change it to ferret fucking if that's easier, right? And so the problem is that like I have a moral philosophy that is separate from my ethical situation that I believe is objectively grounded. So I believe the non-aggression principle is objectively grounded, but that doesn't necessarily give me a moral framework about how to act in the world.
Sure, I understand. You're saying that it's a category of actions you can't do, but within those actions, you're not sure how, like it doesn't tell you which one is optimal or whatever. It's not utilitarian.
In that I have moral preferences, right? Yeah,
I understand the difference. Like again, moral utilitarianism would give you a ranking of every possible action.
Too, you know. It's so like
I'm trying to compare. So utilitarianism would give you a scale for every possible action, good or bad, and say you should do the best possible action. The non-aggression principle simply says all of these actions in the bad category, don't do them, but for all the good category, it doesn't give you any impetus to pick among them. Beyond other moral principles. The question I'm sort of get at is for that category of bad. Do you think that can be derived from the laws of logic? Because to me, that seems to violate all of the claims that we cannot cross the Izot gap.
Yeah, I don't think Hume's guillotine works here in terms of it, because it's not giving you a moral ought, right? So the is-ought gap it's not giving you a moral ought. First of all, it's giving you an ought not, right? So that's important distinction.
Okay, but you agreed earlier that inaction is action. And like an ought not is the same as ought to do anything but that. It's just an ought to do in the category of not that. So like distinction without a difference. Same thing.
Contraries and contradictions in formal logic are different, but I don't want to get into that because it's not. We can accept. I'll accept your framework for now, just because it's too much. But I do think it's important that people recognize that contraries and contradictions are not the same thing, and so they sometimes lead to different truth claims within logic. But yes, I believe that via argumentation ethics, right, you absolutely can arrive at the non-aggression principle, because I mean, assuming, right, like if we want to start assuming that we accept Aristotelian formal logic, right, assuming I don't have to ground, the law of identity. If you grant me the law of identity in excluded middle, right, like it's much quicker, that process. But yeah, I would say that you go from there. And then once you recognize that you can't have contradictions, you then move into Habermas's performative contradiction, which kind of like immediately, which defeats, postmodernism, right? Because Habermas defeated postmodernism, at least the claim of the subjectivity of truth. Because if someone says, there is no truth, they're making a claim that they believe is true, and the claim that they believe is true is that there is no objective truth, and these things are a contradiction via performance. And so this is a P not P situation. And so we either assume that what they're saying is silly words or not. And so then we can move into argumentation in the way in which you would be engaged in a performative contradiction by advocating for, let's say, taxes or socialism. That would you'd be proven wrong by your own words.
What is the performative contradiction of saying, I want to live in a society that has overall less violence, and then using violence to impose non-violence on people who would otherwise be violent? What is the performative contradiction there?
So long as that society is perfectly voluntary, there's no contradiction.
What's the contradiction? I'm okay with imposing on people. Like if the contradiction is that I'm okay with origin.
Right. So if you're okay with using violence against other people that haven't chosen to live in your society, right? That they haven't contracted to come within the borders of, SDL land, right?
Yeah.
Then what you are saying is that you're saying that it is okay and is morally preferable to use violence against other people that are non-aggressors, right? People that you don't like, or that have opinions you don't like, or et cetera. You're okay using violence against those people to form them in a society that you believe consequentially leads to preferable outcomes, right? So you agree with that statement?
Yeah, Aidentopia would have like violence for the reduction of violence. Yes.
Okay. All right. Right. So my question, it's an interesting question. We can go through the contradiction, but I kind of have a different question for you, which is like a classical thought experiment, right? Which is, you know what I mean? Like just as a fun little thing, right? These are always fun. Like, so would you be okay with the town, right, that is a perfect utopia and everyone is happy and everyone is beautiful, right? There's no crime, there's no violence, there's no theft, There's no disagreements that aren't handled peaceably almost instantaneously. Everyone has all of their basic needs met, all the way to self-actualization of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And then at 18, you learn that in order for this society to work, you have to gang rape a little girl in a basement somewhere. But it's 1 million people that are living in near perfect harmony, right? And it's your job now to be a part of the gang rape, to gang rape the little girl, the 9-year-old girl. Are you engaging in that, or are you leaving that society behind to go live in the lawless lands, the Mad Max areas?
Utilitarianism would say, yes, it's justified. I would just add that a left version of utilitarianism would ask, well, why is it necessary? Like, is this powering the magic machine? Like,
it's fucking magic. It's magic. All right. Don't fucking question it. It's a magic machine. All right.
I know, but that's kind of the point.
It's fair.
This is who walk away from Omelas. It's just an argument of, would you be okay with some violence if it gave everyone a utopia? And the utilitarian answer is always going to be yes. But of course, the point is that in reality, it's not a magic machine. It's a little bit of violence to everyone. That violence is distributed over a huge number of people. And so it's way less extreme than one person being in like life-ending pain, like permanent trauma forever, as it was in Omelas, as it is in your example.
So are you a rule utilitarian, right? Or are you rationalizing it as, I guess I'll let you finish. I'm sorry. Because that's really all I'm testing.
I am a rule utilitarian. And so like in the hypothetical, I will accept whatever. But what I'm trying to say is that in reality, we very rarely face the problem of, do you need to torture someone to keep the lights on?
Of course. I mean, it's a thought experiment. Like, I don't begrudge you in saying that, but I'd still want you to bite the bullet, right? Just like I'll have to bite the bullet if you ask me, will I steal a penny to save the world, right? And the answer is well, who's making, like, the right answer that the libertarians force you to say is, yes, I refuse to steal a penny, let the world blow up. And my answer, similar to yours, is like, who's forcing me in this situation? Like, why am I forced in this situation? Who's aggressing that is holding the entire world hostage in this situation, right? I'm going to go stop that person. I will steal the penny because I'm doing so under duress, and I'm going to find whoever's doing that to like save the world, right?
So we're both biting the bullet, and we're both trying to say that generally these are contrived scenarios. But what's not so contrived when you get to the real world is, to me, stuff that like, there's very credible evidence that like social spending to reduce poverty does not reduce economic growth. It just reduces poverty. So it very clearly seems to be the opposite of a who walk away from Omelas situation, where there's a small amount of violence done to everyone, but it leads to a great reduction of violence for like almost everyone as well.
And this is the danger and evils of utilizing empiricism to make logically flawed arguments. Is this idea that like, you can establish historical facts that are convenient to your political prescriptions, and then you utilize data and you formulate science in such a way that it gives you the information that you want, and then say, look at all of this evidence that proves what I want. And then the inverse occurs, right? Where we go, well, look at how based capitalism is and how evil socialism is, right? And then we compare like East and West Germany, and then we go, but you see, they're different because, one had gotten rid of feudalism earlier, and one got more aid, and so it's like all of a sudden, all of these uncontrollable variables are important, and that like the falsifiability comes into question, and you become an Austrian magically, right? Whenever it goes against your political prescriptions. But whenever you want to do things that are proven to, that are evil, that violate people's rights and autonomy and private property rights, all of a sudden the empiricism shows that the utilitarian calculus is in your favor. I don't know if I'm muted or if you're muted. Did you accidentally hit your mic?
I'm muted.
Okay, Sorry.
I have two responses, and they go into sort of different routes. One would be trying to return to the origin of why you think that your morals can be grounded in laws of logic. It would be try and return again to where is the performative contradiction here? If I'm willing to bite these bullets, to me, it doesn't seem like there's a contradiction. It just seems like I'm okay with coercion for my ends. So be it. Like, I'm going to be whatever like bullet you ask me to bite, I'm going to be biting it. The other option to me is shoot, I actually lost it. We should stay on the first option then.
Yeah, it's fine. Sorry. It's fine. So again, have you researched argumentation ethics from Hoppe at all?
Yeah, I argued it in high school, and I think it's absurd. I think the argument that like, to have a peaceful conversation with someone else where you converse with them on the laws, like based on what is true and what is not, therefore you have to have respect for them as like a person or a body, that is completely absurd. I see what I'm doing as trying to propagandize, get my message out there, and change people's minds. Yes,
so
by logic. Well, I am arguing. I'm trying to change your mind, but
Mhm.
I'm not doing it because like I have respect for you as like an independent owner of your own body, and I own my own body or whatever.
Well, but you just contradicted yourself. You said that you are trying to change my mind, right?
Yeah.
So by saying that you're trying to change my mind, you just said, well, I'm not recognizing you as an owner of your own body. How could you not? If I wasn't an owner of my own body, you could use other means to change my mind without all of this effort. I am an owner of my own body because you're trying to change my mind.
Because I can't. Because one person can't change. My goals are not simply to change your mind, but to change many people's minds. For those who have political goals,
mine as well.
It is not something that a single person can accomplish with a gun and a lot of like gusto. It's something you have to do by like winning political support. So it is literally not something you can do. Like, even if I didn't think that you got to own your body,
this is irrelevant.
I would not choose to do so another way.
This is irrelevant. This is a distraction, right? You're talking about the broader conversation. That's fine that the broader conversation is also to an audience of people that are your viewers, right? And my viewers, obviously much smaller. If only I could get one video that isn't automatically demonetized. Just one. I get like one every 3 months.
You did choose the worst possible version of Who Walk Away from Omelas, so
yeah, it is what it is. I'm going to be honest, and it's all right. I get demonetized. It's fine. But so the broader conversation is irrelevant to the grounding of argumentation ethics, right? It's a distraction. I totally understand that it's a distraction.
You're arguing I'm doing a performative contradiction, but I'm telling you, I'm not even doing the action that you think is contradicting. Right? I'm doing a different action.
Then you lied, right? You said that you're trying to change my mind, right? That you're trying to convince me.
I'm trying to change your mind, but I'm not changing. My goal is not to change your mind. My goal is to change your mind in sequence with a whole bunch of other people. Or like if this was a purely one-on-one conversation, no audience, it would be your mind and then someone else's and then someone else's and then someone else's. And if I changed your mind by bringing a gun to your house and like forcing you to recite Das Kapital from like end to end or whatever, that would not actually, one, change your mind, and two,
pause.
It wouldn't achieve my political goals.
1 or 3, because they fucking contradict and you know it.
I'm not a Marxian, but the point here more broadly is that coercion is generally not even a very effective way to change people's minds, and that wouldn't be my broader political goals. So the performative contradiction here, to me, doesn't seem like it's occurring. Right, so long as I'm trying to change more than one person's mind.
You're saying I have other goals attached to my speech. Therefore, I can ignore one of the goals attached to my speech. And it's like, that's the goal that is the grounding of argumentation ethics. Either you are arguing, you muted your mic again.
Oh shit, I'm sorry. Thank you. Actually, no, please go. I was interrupting.
Yeah, I mean, you were, but I mean, it's fine. I told you I'm long-winded, and if you needed to, like, go ahead. Like, if I get mad, I'll yell. It's okay. Like, either you are arguing or you're fighting, right? At least in the conception of argumentation ethics from Hoppe, like these are the terms that he's using, right? So if you're fighting, right, you're physically coercing me in some capacity, you're threatening me, you're beating me up, or you're engaged in some fraud, right? Like you're intentionally lying and manipulating me and no longer respecting me as an individual and my autonomy. But what you are doing when you are arguing with me with the goal of changing my mind and having a conversation with me to change the way that I think is that you are establishing you're establishing an ethical norm. You're establishing that it is preferable for you, that you have a moral preference towards engaging in conversation in these situations and recognizing that you have an incapacity to change my mind via coercion, at least in this instance. And so when you establish that ethical norm, like it's like I guess maybe we have to go into like what it means to establish ethical norms, right? But like it is more than, I guess, modern people that don't think about philosophy often much think, right? They're like establishing that as an ethical norm, as a domain that must be true amongst all categories, right? So when you say that something is true, it can't be true. Something can be morally true now, but under the same circumstances be morally true morally false in another instance where the circumstances are the same, right? Like you can't say like killing a baby for no reason is wrong, right? And then like later killing a baby for no reason is right because like wink wink it was right then but not wrong then, right? Like something had to have changed.
That's what I'm trying to ask, is that I don't see any contradiction occurring here. My argument is that, like, in general, people who have a political goal should try and argue with those who disagree with them, because persuasion does occur by logical argumentation. There's a lot of evidence to back that up. We don't need to derive that from first principles. But there is also a huge downside for if you tried to coerce people, that you wouldn't be able to do it as a repeated action. You can only try and coerce someone like once if you get caught, maybe twice if you get lucky. And then thus goes the end of your career as someone trying to coerce people into having the correct political views. The contradiction here just seems to be like the optimal outcome for people is to be non-coercive. It could be that we lived in a different world where coercion was more viable, and maybe this would be a different conversation, but like it's not. And so that's why it's like, that's one of the reasons it's wrong to coerce people, because it leads to a violent society where people, like, it leads to bad moral outcomes. I don't see what the contradiction is occurring here. And so to me, if there's no performative contradiction, then it seems like the argument for the non-aggression principle being derivable from pure logic falls apart. That's all.
Okay, so we really want to get into it. We're going to get into it, right? So I'm gonna give you a sheet that we can go through together. So let me see if I can send you this Microsoft Word document.
I'm getting a homework document from Fabian Liberty to prove that I'm actually contradicting myself.
I mean, or I can just show it on screen, right? These are like short notes, cliff notes, right, to help us like kind of walk through it. If you want to just do it that way, here we go. We'll do it like this, right? So we'll just open this up, right? No, obviously these are my writings, right? So again, these are kind of the assumptions from argumentation ethics primer, right? Kind of like delineated, right? So this isn't obviously the full argument, right? This is just a kind of like a way to go through it, so we can go through it step by step. Right, we can find out kind of where it is that you're disagreeing with this. So
sure, we went through the action axiom.
Yeah, I think we've gone through the action axiom, right? Like you can deny it all you want, but you kind of admitted that even if you do deny it, that you don't have any particular grounding in empiricism that's any better than human action, and you're not capable of arguing against it without engaging in a contradiction. You just say that it's invalid because it's not falsifiable, which assumes empiricism is correct, which again is kind of like your own axioms that you just prefer for whatever reason. Which I think, if you can't argue against it, I don't know how it's wrong, but all right. So if we move on, we go to only those capable of argumentation can make valid propositions, right? So you cannot deny this without a contradiction. Any ethical proposal must be capable of valid proposition. So in this example, right, like I would say that argumentation ethics doesn't apply to non-moral agents, non-moral actors, right? Because they're not capable of making a valid moral propositional statement. Would you disagree with that?
I'll accept the second premise that, we've got to both be capable of argumentation. It's
right,
the third one, which is the argument I've been arguing against.
Okay, which one? Which one? Like if a claim is incompatible with the claim's validity, then it is an impossibility proof? You disagree with that?
No, sorry. The third axiom here: argumentation is a form of action employing scarce means.
Look! You're already copying ahead of us. This is actually an unnecessary part from his primer, but we can get into it. It's fine.
Well, so the reason I'm the whole argument I've been trying to give is that argumentation is a form of action. It does employ scarce means. The fact does not therefore demonstrate that I'm respecting like your private property, nor does demonstrate that I'm like respecting your bodily autonomy or whatever. It could just be that the other options will be even less efficient uses of my time. That's the argument I'm giving, and in fact, it's the truth as well.
Right. So the thing is that you're saying that that you're only talking with me as a means of propagandizing my brain or whatever, right? Like you're trying to control my brain.
I think that's what everyone is actually doing at the end of the day.
Yeah, like, and that's fine, right? Like I want to walk through this, right? So you're trying to control my brain. You're trying to change my mind, right? And it is invaluable. One might even say it's morally not preferable, as you've kind of already hinted at and said yourself, right? From your own grounding, that it would be morally preferable to attempt to argue with me and change my mind without coercion, because to do so would face backlash, potential violence, or it wouldn't lead to a peaceful society, or you would no longer be trusted in some capacity, right? All of these things, right? So you do, even from your own kind of utilitarian lens, like you recognize that you're establishing this kind of moral preference, that it's morally preferable to attempt to control the other person via argumentation, to bring forward to make moral propositional claims in an environment where you do not use violence against that person.
Yep. And so that yields a very different conclusion than everyone actually respects private property.
Right. Well, you're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead that everyone respects private property, right? You're jumping ahead in the logic. I'm trying to get you to formally state that you are, via your actions, making a moral propositional claim, that you are acting out of your will, which is that it is morally
I'm
preferable.
Agreeing.
Right. I'm trying to establish that, right? So you've already said that. So to then state that it is not morally preferable whilst acting this out to respect someone's bodily autonomy, which you're saying, well, I'm not doing that. And it's like, well, you're doing that via your actions, right? You're not utilizing violence. You're engaged in truthful speech. Presumably you're not lying. You're not fraudulent.
Okay. Just as a very blunt question, 99% of the time, like a terrorist who is going to do violence to civilians is going to be talking with other people and engaging peaceable actions. Does this mean that therefore they do not want to use violence against other people and hurt their bodily autonomy?
No, of course not.
Because different ends have different effective means. No, that's the point.
That's not why. It's that they're lying if they attempt to justify violence.
Well, no, it's that trying to talk to someone, like trying to recruit somebody to your cause, cannot be done by blowing them up. You have to talk with them. Trying to change someone's mind cannot be done effectively at scale by like raiding their house or whatever. You have to do so by logic, by argumentation.
The use of argumentation or non-violence, right, does not.
Am I wrong? What is wrong with my statement?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just that you're applying it to argumentation ethics incorrectly, right? So the usage of violence at one point, right, does not prove that the person didn't argue at another point. What it proves is that these two are within contradiction, and that when someone attempts to argue or justify that violence, right, that is a contradiction of their current behavior, not necessarily invalidated by future behavior that is violent.
Where is the contradiction between doing one action towards one end, doing another action towards another end, all of which ends are in line with someone's moral philosophy? Like, if you are someone who wants to enact the maximum possible civilian carnage as a terrorist, you want to recruit people, you have to do so by talking, and you want to kill people, and you do so by killing. You can't do the same through the same means, but the overall goal is still being achieved. Where's the performative contradiction in the terrorist action, and where's the performative contradiction in my action?
You're saying that it's different means because they're different things, right? That's the crux of your claim. Is that if I say I'm attempting to convince you in argumentation, right, and then a different thing is I'm doing some other violent thing. So the problem is that you're taking a separate action and then post hoc adding it to argumentation ethics. This is not the claim. The claim is when you attempt to justify that other action. That is when you are in the performative contradiction. When you attempt to say that it is okay to use violence and coercion and control to violate people's bodily autonomy, whilst you are enacting that you are utilizing and respecting my bodily autonomy, and that you're incapable of doing so, and you establish this moral situation.
You're trying to say the contradiction occurs because I am acting in one way in action in area A, and I believe something in area B. Let me try this out.
No, I'm saying you're acting one way in area A, and you're saying something contradictory in area A. Area B, the terrorist attack, the outside thing, that is irrelevant. It's the contradiction happening at the same time by justifying the other thing.
Let me try and lay this out slightly more formally, and then ask you where the contradiction occurs. In this conversation, I am saying, it's like area A in the argument. I am saying, one, it is generally good to argue with people using logical arguments because that leads to the conclusion that more people will be changed in their minds, and you want more people to have their minds changed. That's like what I'm doing right now. To me, that is what I'm enacting. And then you're saying I'm contradicting myself because in this argument, I'm arguing that in area B, point 1 would be that sometimes it's justifiable to use violence because B, it reduces the amount of violence in society. Where, at like what, in which logical step is my action here
so
contradicting?
There's a couple
contradicting?
Things. There's fluff in area A, right? Because it seems like you're trying to avoid, again, you're sneaking in that the contradiction is somehow solved by you talking to other people, right?
I didn't even mention that in this here. It's just that like
you just did. You said via me and other people, but maybe that was just like a force of habit. That's not really
even if it was for one person. The argument could just be the most efficient way to achieve my goal of changing minds or changing a mind is logical argumentation. Like that's it. Right. But it could also be true that the most efficient way of stopping violence is using violence. Like, where is the contradiction? If the argument is minimizing violence, go ahead.
Yeah. So again, we can set B aside, right? Or we can just focus primarily on B actually, because A is you're separating them into two different things, and I'm not really sure why you're separating them into two different things. Because the argument of what you're doing wrong is when you justify violence, right? So let's stay with B. Because A is your goal, and you're saying B is separate from your goal. But the problem is that both are utilizing the same action. And the action is that you are engaged in speaking with me. And through that speaking with me, you're not being fraudulent. Presumably, you're not lying to me, and you're not trying to deceive and gain some profit by lying to me. So you're not acting in an aggressive form in that capacity. And you don't have a gun to my head, right? You're not doing anything
that's right off screen, yeah.
Yeah, right. So like we got to make sure, you know what I mean? Like we have similar, color of walls. So assuming that there's no violence occurring, right? You are establishing via your actions, not your words per se, but via your actions, that I am an individual, that I have exclusive control over my mind, right? That you don't have a magic button that changes my mind, right? You don't have a swinging, swivel, like little fucking timepiece that tricks my brain into doing whatever. So you recognize that I'm an individual, that I have my own autonomy, and that you are utilizing non-aggressive means as a means of changing my opinion. And you're establishing this as a morally preferable outcome. You're saying, no, I'm not. Your argument, and I'm trying to steelman your argument. You're saying, no, I'm not. I'm not establishing this via my argument because secretly or even openly in my mind, I'm not actually respecting your autonomy. I'm not actually doing all of the things I'm doing because I have a different goal, and that doesn't matter.
Do you think it's not possible to have contextually different methods for achieving like an overarching goal? Like I don't
obviously I wouldn't disagree with that there are different methods for achieving goals.
Well, so then what's if all I'm saying is this is contextual, like again, I'm the only contradiction that seems to be emerging is you want to argue that anyone who argues with you has to be doing so because their actions show they respect you as an individual. But no, I'm saying I don't think that the fact that someone argues with someone means that they respect that person's bodily autonomy. Like, period. Why would I make that assumption?
Do you make that assumption because in order to argue against it, right? You would have to argue that you have control over my body, or that someone else has control over my body and can make me change my opinion. Can you do that? Can you make me change my opinion?
Not efficiently, no. But that's like the whole point of this is that this hinges on the efficiency argument. If we live in a scarce society and I'm applying my methods as efficiently as possible, then it would not make sense to coerce you. Like, so by that own logic, it is actually contradictory for me to try and use violence towards you. Even if I did think that you do not own your body, it would be contradictory for me to use that violence against you.
It's not a matter of what you believe. It doesn't matter if you believe that I have control over my own body. You recognize it via your actions and prove it. You prove it unassailably true, right? That you cannot magically control my body. That I do indeed have my own body and that I have exclusive control over my body. Even if you don't believe it, it doesn't matter that you don't believe it. You could even say it, and that would be the contradiction, because you're proving this thing to be true via your actions. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are.
Would we accept the idea that your actions prove some underlying moral belief in almost any other area? Like,
yes,
you live in a society where you're forced to pay taxes because you do not openly rebel or whatever. I must assume that you respect those taxes implicitly.
No, of course not. Because I mean, like, I was very, very clear that the conversation didn't involve fraud and it didn't involve coercion. I go to jail if I don't pay taxes. So obviously that doesn't happen. Like that's the difference between argumentation and fighting, right? It's very explicit. Sure. Like the taxes situation does work. But I give you an example where it does work, right? Where we would accept this. Smoking a cigarette, right? Someone says, I do not want to smoke a cigarette right now. Smoking cigarettes is bad. They believe in their head that smoking cigarettes is bad, and they believe that it is wrong to smoke cigarettes. And they say openly, smoking cigarettes is bad. No one should do it ever. And in this moment, I do not desire a cigarette. And then they grab a cigarette and they light up a cigarette and they light it. This is a performative contradiction. Like, they may believe many of the things that they state that they believe, but they are proving with their actions that they prefer a cigarette right now than not preferring a cigarette. This is right. So we would accept this in other domains as well. The performative contradiction is perfectly valid.
Even within the domain of argumentation, we would not accept this for other. So if I said we're having an argumentation right now, this must mean that both of us value politeness in conversation, that we value the ability for the other person to reciprocally respect us, or any other additional thing that's necessary for the free flow of conversation. I wouldn't say any of that is a necessary conclusion because people are having a polite debate, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so the fact that we're having polite debate. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, I want to pick through. I haven't heard this argument before, so I want to. It's an interesting take, right? So you're saying that
you were having a polite debate with me.
It up.
This must mean that you value politeness in debates, or that you value politeness as a value. Otherwise, you would not be behaving politely, because you could be using jibes and insults to get under my skin and more efficiently win the debate or whatever. And the correct response to me would be, well, that wouldn't be an efficient use of your time. Using jabs and japes and whatnot would not actually win you the argument. But that's the argument that I'm giving, right? That if, hey, I just stopped this argument and started driving to like wherever, like I've got to change this guy's mind. There's only one way I can do it. That would not be an efficient use of my time. There are other things I could do in that time.
Right. So, well, like, I think if you started driving, right, like if you were like, I'm gonna go to this guy's house, right, you would be moving from one domain into the other, right? So your current actions would change. So the question is, so sticking to that, right? Sticking to that is, one is using politeness. So by engaging in the conversation politely, as opposed to immediately coming in here like a debate bro, right? Because I wouldn't even have fucking brought up this shit if we were debate broing, right? Because it's like it makes it too easy to argue against me, which is fine. Like I want to have an honest conversation here. God forbid, I don't know why I want to do that with you commie fucks, but so the question is am I establishing that politeness is a moral norm, that I prefer politeness over non-politeness? So I mean, like you could derive that, right? You could make that claim, and the question is could I argue against that claim without engaging in a contradiction? And I think I could, and the reason is that the inaction of argumentation is not quite the same thing as politeness, right? Because like I could say, I'm wearing a blue shirt, therefore I have a moral belief that we're both wearing blue, I think, actually, right? So we have a moral belief that all debates should be done in blue shirts, right? And that's not true. We're not actually doing that just because we're engaged in blue shirts. I think the thing that makes the substantive difference here is that there is kind of like no other option. Right, like I can get up and go wear a red shirt and come back, right? And it wouldn't change the validity of any of my arguments. It wouldn't contradict with any of my arguments, unless, of course, my argument hinged upon what shirt I was wearing, right? Whereas with the performative contradiction as it applies to argumentation is that there are only two options. There are arguing and there is fighting within that domain. Now, you could break those into different domains if you wanted to, right? But they would still fit into those two categories. And so if you are arguing, right, there is an establishment that you are not fighting and that you prefer that to the other. And so again, with the blue shirts, I'm proving that I am actually currently proving that I prefer blue shirt in this domain, right? That this is, for whatever reason, I prefer this blue shirt. But if we start getting into an argument about why blue shirts are evil, right? Then we might get into like an issue of like, I'm engaged in a performative contradiction. I believe blue shirts are the devil and I would never wear a blue shirt, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. Then it becomes relevant that I'm wearing it. So I think the same thing would apply to politeness. I think would be my argument, like, right? Like I would have to be arguing, against politeness in some capacity whilst being super polite constantly and performing that politeness and doing that across multiple domains.
Sure, if you were arguing against politeness very politely, it would be like a performative contradiction. But what I'm trying to suggest is that there's a difference between arguing against politeness while being polite. And in this conversation, I'm arguing for coercion without coercing you. That's a difference. One of these is arguing for a negative while doing a positive. The other is arguing for a positive while doing a negative. The fact that I'm failing to do something is not the same thing as doing something that I claim not to want to be doing, and vice versa.
Okay, so what are you failing to do? I'm missing your reversal of the logic.
I am not coercing you in this conversation, right? Conversely, the politeness is something that like
you're actively being polite. You're saying you're actively being polite, and therefore you believe that the performative contradiction occurs because you're actively doing something, and then you would be arguing against the thing that you're actively doing. But you do not believe that I've established that you're actively recognizing exclusive control over my body.
The reason I'm saying
it to you like multiple times, like you just like.
But the proof here seems to hinge to me entirely on the claim that like that coercion is even a feasible option. The argument that I'm giving here is that there's really only one way to effectively change people's minds at scale as like an individual.
No. You recognize that I have exclusive control over my body. By having a conversation with me at all, you recognize that I am an independent human, right? And that as an independent human, you don't have sorcery spells to change my mind. So you recognize that I am an individual that has exclusive control over my body. We can at the very least start there, right?
Recognizing that you control your body is not the same thing as recognizing like the legal right to absolute self-control. And like that's even going beyond. That's even before.
But I'm trying to get you.
I'm trying to absolute self-control, getting to property rights and whatnot. But like, yeah.
But I'm trying to get you to accept that fact, and you're not accepting that fact.
I have
keep brushing over.
No. I completely accept the fact that like I do not control
maybe I'm missing it.
No, okay. I completely accept the fact that I control you. It's the next step that I don't. It's that you are saying because I accept that I don't control you. Well, the next step is that I am respecting your like property ownership of yourself, right? That's the next step. That because I recognize I don't control you, that I recognize that you must be your own property, as opposed to like any of the other possible reasons I could have for not attacking you.
Right. So let's go. Right. I can officially confirm, right, that you do agree that I have exclusive control over my body. What you disagree with is
not completely exclusively, but for the purpose of the conversation, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, who else has control over my body?
I mean, like, we're not too far away from like some degree of manipulation of people's brains, but I don't know. There's a future in which this will become decreasingly so, but for the sake of the argument, let's say you have 100% exclusive control. Like just as an analogy, ants have very little individual control.
No. I mean, we could go back further into determinism, etc.
I'm not trying to. I'm explicitly trying to say I don't care about the determinism.
I'm not in debate bro mode. Listen to me. I'm not in debate bro mode. I'm in genuine conversation with a socialist mode, which is going to piss off all of my audience, and I don't care. Right? In genuine conversation mode. I wouldn't throw up this document and like give you the notes to go through it and stuff like that, unless I was just genuinely trying to have a conversation about this. So yeah, no, I mean like we could go to a determinism thing. I think we both would accept that functionally we act as if we have choice, right? And we're not like, so at the very least we can move off of that. Whether or not determinism or soft determinism or no determinism is real, we kind of all act as if determinism isn't real because we like blame people for doing bad things. We dislike people when they make choices, so we assume some level of control or locus of control, right?
Yes. So let me maybe give like a thought-provoking example of this. Let's say that I had installed a chip in my brain, and every response you just heard was completely generated by ChatGPT, live response to ChatGPT. Would this mean that therefore you were respecting like ChatGPT as an agent having property rights? Or does anyone who has a conversation with an AI therefore respect the individual self-ownership of that AI?
This is a super fun conversation, right? So I would say that if AI is capable of understanding, like the problem with AI is we don't know if it's ever possible for AI to have consciousness, because we don't necessarily have a great theory of consciousness, even though we might have one philosophically. And that is important because from my perspective, at least from a libertarian thought, it requires the ability to be a moral actor in terms of being able to make valid moral propositional statements. And in order to make those valid statements, they must be conscious of what those statements mean. Whereas ChatGPT right now is an NLP, right? A natural language processor. And so because of that, it's just an automated system of patterns. It doesn't have that. Now you might be able to make the argument that humans are
deterministically,
but
yeah,
right. You might be able to make the argument that humans are that, right? But it doesn't appear. That gets into a whole nother thing. If we work under the assumption that humans are deterministic, et cetera, then like kind of morality begins to evaporate in general. I mean, kind of everything is permitted. We kind of get into a Brothers Karamazov, like Ivan Karamazov, if
So
God isn't real, everything is permitted. And so like, I don't know that that's particularly helpful, even though it might technically be true.
Well,
I don't think it is. I don't believe so, but.
It sounds like your argument on the NAP is contingent on believing in some form of free will, of some like escape from determinism, or some escape from randomness without free will.
You start with first principle at top of the paper, right? I said it's the first principle is the axiom of action, right? So it is
the fact that people act does not mean they act freely. That is these are completely different. The assumption that people act without being predictable by previous the history or the previous state of the universe is a very different claim.
So that's the second bullet point. You said we could skip by it, but values, ends, means, preference, profit, cost, loss, etc. A priori knowledge, right? So this is under the axiom of action. You would then move into assuming that humans act like I did earlier, where I said, okay, there's act, and then I did like valued, ordered consequences, etc. Right? Psychic profit, psychic loss. All of those things that you see in Austrian economic theory are also part of the axiom. They're the logical derivatives of the presupposition that man acts willfully and purposefully, right? So
the fact that people act in line with their preferences is not, again, it's not the same thing as saying they act in line with preferences which are not fully formed by prior events. And so I'm trying to say that like, yeah. It seems like the non-aggression principle, if it falls apart in a deterministic world, it seems like this is a really, really, really weak bridge over the Izot gap. That like you have to assume the existence of free will.
If it falls right, but sure, but if it falls apart in a deterministic world, right, like it's no less invalid than any other moral philosophy that exists, right? Like you're saying you're like, but the major weakness of your moral philosophy is one that is 100% equally a criticism of mine and all others that exist, right? So it's like, I mean, sure, I will say you know what I mean? Like you could say that like the logic falls apart if choice and will no longer exists, but it's like, so does yours, and therefore so do all of your moral claims.
It's actually funny because utilitarians have made the exact opposite argument, that in a world of free will, that the idea of responsibility makes no sense. If it is actually true that every person has a little like quantum random particle generator inside of them that decides which action they're going to take instead of deterministic rules, and that rules stuff like prison to be absurd. If people truly have free will, the prisoners could simply choose to no longer do crime, but they don't because they do so in a predictable fashion, right? People are, to a utilitarian and a determinist, basically machines. We know why people do crime. It's like an exposure to violence, it's an exposure to like high poverty, et cetera, but basically deprivation theory in a nutshell and subculture theory in a nutshell. And how do we stop that? Well, we remove them from the subculture, we remove them from the deprivation, and then they do less crime. So like utilitarianism to some degree requires some level of determinism. And in a fully deterministic world, it's not clear why that logic falls apart. We just would simply try and take actions that deterministically lead to a better outcome.
No,
now,
no,
of course,
no,
we can't actually make a choice. You're
you're trying to make utilitarianism like somehow superior in a purely deterministic society, and they're wildly different. You are utilizing a process of soft determinism, right? Like Daniel Dennett kind of philosophy of determinism versus hard determinism, and these have wildly different implications, right? Like we can understand that human beings' pH balance, that their medical needs, their epigenetic systems, their nurture as a child, their beyond their control, their mental resilience, right, to trauma, their childhood trauma that they did occur, like these are ACEs, right? I can't remember what they're called, adverse childhood events, right? Like that, all of these things have factors on the behavior, the capacity of an individual, right? And still recognize that choice exists, right? It's just those choices would then be limited by, IQ or, possible like, I would say IQ, we'll just say G factor, right? Intelligence, right? G factor and, emotional control, their capacity to control their will, etc. Right? Like that's a very different claim, right? To say that utilitarians recognize these things have impact, as would most people, right, would recognize that these things have impact, and that if we want to lessen the impact or heal that there are interventions that we can do to reduce those to make situations better. It's wildly different than no one has choice, and that choice is an illusion, that will is an illusion, and that I'm not responsible and no one is responsible or ever has been responsible for any action that has ever occurred or will occur.
You can frame this in two ways. One is that utilitarians don't care about responsibility. They care about changing outcomes in the future. And for that effect, responsibility is a useful tool. Like the idea of responsibility that like you did something and therefore you should change in response to that is like a useful tool for getting the outcomes we want. That's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is that like, yeah, no one is responsible and we are only caring about consequences, but like we care about those consequences, so we punish people who make bad actions because that leads to good consequences. Like I just, even a hard deterministic world, it doesn't seem like this conclusion really falls away. Okay, let me pulling back at a very broad level. We got into this because you argued
you're a hard determinist. It doesn't matter, right? Like you could just do whatever.
I mean, if you're a free will, the argument from the utilitarian sense is that from a free will perspective, that like punishing someone also doesn't matter. Upholding the non-aggression principle by armed guards doesn't actually matter because people could simply choose to ignore the armed guards. Everyone could just choose by free will to not do that. They could choose not to follow their preferences.
How does that then not matter if people could choose to violate the non-aggression principle? The non-aggression principle doesn't matter because people have choice is a silly argument. Come on.
If choice is such a large degree that it can override deterministic like backgrounds, then society shouldn't be predictable in the way that it is, and we shouldn't be trying to design society in a way which leads people down predictable paths. But in reality, like if free will does not exist, but if it did, it is so unmeasurable that it can be ignored. It is statistical noise. So like I just if the argument that
has massive implications for moral philosophy, because you then remove responsibility of all actions. No one is responsible for any action, right? No one can be blamed for any action. Now you could say blame or not, right? Like we could look at a statistical thing, and to the best of our ability, percentage wise, guess, and then of course all actions could be would then become morally permissible. Every action is morally permissible because
in your moral framework it does, but not in a utilitarian one, because your moral framework requires free will. The utilitarian would just say, "So what? I don't care about responsibility. We'll punish them."
I know.
Because that will make
so
people
what?
Make a better
They'll go
choice.
to the re-education camps because the study says that the re-education camps are to create a 10% better society. So off to the gulag with you. You have the wrong opinion, and it's okay because it's not really your fault. It's just determinism. And once you're re-educated, you'll work in the new society better. Like you can make anything permissible.
Okay. That's not what decides what's okay and not. The whole argument of utilitarians is that there's some outcome they're trying to maximize. Now, it could be that outcome would lead them to support re-education.
With imperfect knowledge and subjective bias and value ordinance. You can make anything morally right the moment that you accept a utilitarian framework, and especially if you can accept determinism. All
So
actions become morally permissible so long as you make an argument that they're good, and you can change what it is that you value, right? Like heuristics can become extremely valuable, or they can become meaningless. Like the idea of personal autonomy can be very valuable, or it can be meaningless. Like there is no, you can't name the trait. You can't put a number to the happiness, utilitarian calculus.
Sure.
You just kind of make up shit.
I don't believe in objective morality. I don't think there's a way to cross the Azot gap. And the argument I'm trying to give here is that in fact, in your own words, if free will does not exist, everything is morally permissible, right? In your view, objective morality collapses if determinism is correct. Or just to be clear, if a world is random, like quantum randomness, but free will still doesn't exist, which is the world that we live in, where it's either completely deterministic or it's deterministic at all scales that matter.
That's a religious statement. That's a religious statement. You might as well be like a devout Christian saying like, go to church, bigot. Like it's a religious statement to say that.
How do we know that free will exists, right?
Well, no,
what experiment?
It's a different. No, I'm saying this is the difference between an atheist and an agnostic, right? Where I would still say I'm an atheist, right? Because I don't believe in a God, right? But it's the difference between someone says, I don't believe in a God, and someone says, there is no God. This is a religious statement. For you to say that the world is deterministic and it is purely chaos is a religious statement. And that religious statement, that religious belief, since we're so worried about consequences, the fallout from that religious statement is the justification of the world's greatest evils, so long as one has the power and the capacity to charismatically justify those evils. And that is I mean, it might be your belief, it might be your religion and your religious belief, but that is a fucked up worldview to try and impose on others and to try and promulgate.
The claim I have that free will does not exist is the same one as that God does not exist. And the total lack of evidence for one, you should just assume that
right, they're both religious statements.
Well, I'm saying, assume this is something that people invented. It's probably simpler to get rid of it. I'm not saying this is an absolute truth, that like 100% chance there is no free will, 100% chance there is no God. I'm saying there is no God.
This doesn't exist. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist.
In the same way that I say there are no unicorns, there is no 10th planet, right? These are things that we can like say, hey, there's really, 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 really strong evidence that there is no evidence for this, right? That we've examined everything we can, and none of it, not a single bit, points to the existence of this thing. So we should probably assume it does not.
Have you ever done DMT?
No, I
I'm just curious. You should do some DMT and get back to me on this.
Well,
just throwing that out there. You should do it.
I can have a Joe Rogan episode then.
I'm just saying you need to do some DMT. I'm just saying, man. I'm just like, have you ever done any strong psychedelics?
Nope, just weed, I think. But
weed's barely even psychoactive. Like if you eat it, it's kind of psychoactive, but it's nothing. All right. Okay, I'm just curious. You sound like someone that's never like the firmness by which you believe you're fucking purely like you sound like I feel like horsemen atheists in like the fucking early 2000s. It's like
if the strongest argument for the existence of free will is that like if you take a substance which alters your perception, then you might perceive that it exists, then it feels like that's a really, 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 really weak
that's not my strongest argument. It was just a thought that popped in my head because it is one of those things that like you kind of only hear from people that haven't done psychedelics. Like I've never heard someone that's done a lot of psychedelics and experienced altered states of consciousness just have this religious, emphatic belief that like there is no God, there is no afterlife, there is no nothing. I know that for a fact, and the world is chaotic and deterministic.
I don't know it for 100% fact. That's what I know it as strongly as I know.
Yeah, because I had to push you to say that.
I know. I say that.
Then don't say it.
I think that the saying that I know there is no 10th planet and I know there is no God, the only reason that we treat one specially, or I say I know there is no free will, the only reason we treat these specially is because they have such high importance in our systems. We treat it as like, oh my God, I can't believe you'd say that. It's whatever. It's the exact same thing as any other scientific claim.
Sure. I'm sure. I will accept that there is a certain deference to something that there's very little scientific evidence for, right? Well, very little, I would say, essentially zero. You know what I mean? Like you'd have to stretch anything to gain that. I'm an atheist too, right? Like just to be clear, like I did go to Liberty University, which is a weird thing for an atheist, but I was really interested in it. So I was like,
congrats for coming out the other side. I guess
it was way better than than being a libertarian at a fucking liberal arts college. Like Jesus Christ, those people are so close minded.
So I guess what I would point to is this. I think the evidence for free will is roughly as strong as... What's that?
Unless you want to keep looking at the fucking argumentation ethics thing.
Yeah, you can close it out. I guess pulling back a bit.
We didn't get to a couple things, but it's fine. It's like we're on a different spot. Keep going, go.
Well, we didn't get to it because I think that the premise 3, which I do think is essential, did not work. And so I'm saying I don't think it works. And then we got into like it doesn't work for efficient.
I got you to premise 3, and then we were gonna continue, but it's fine.
I mean, one premise being wrong, literally in a deductive sense.
No, you haven't proven anything wrong. I walked you all the way to the most important premise, and then we move on from there, but it's fine.
So, pulling back, if the entire argument for argumentative ethics is a performative contradiction based on a view that my actions indicate that I have a respect for property, then it seems like, again, the end, that is all based on the existence of free will, like grounding it all at the end of the day. This to me seems like a really, 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 really tendentious, like really weak justification for an absolute moral claim.
Yeah, but the thing is that you say, well, it seems to be really weak to me. And so right. And that's fine. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. Right. But when we walk it through, you're forced to admit that you are indeed recognizing that I have exclusive control over my body, right? And what you're saying, right? And the part where we're at now, right? If you want to keep going, we can keep going. Like, you know what I mean? The part where we're at now is that you're saying, well, if we backtrack, it requires that moral systems exist and that morality exists and that choice exists. And it's like, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, I do agree with you that like that axiom is a bit of an assumption based off of all available evidence of human action, right? We all act as if things are true, but that isn't strong evidence really, because I agree with you, right? Like if we want to take a Christian perspective, right? If that were true, we really couldn't argue strongly to be atheists, right? Because we kind of all act like a soul exists. Nobody is like genuinely perplexed when they watch an isekai anime, right? Like I'm pretty sure when people watch an isekai anime, they can think that logically they can imagine, dying from Truck-kun, and Truck-kun comes and takes them out, and then like some big tittied, anime goddess somewhere gives us special powers and puts us in a magical world. And we all just accept it, right? We all just accept, because we kind of have a conception of a soul, even though there's no fucking evidence of a soul. We kind of also, in many interactions, we act as if a soul exists. But like, I think you and I would both pretty vehemently say that we don't believe that a soul exists, right? So I agree with you that like the idea that just because God damn it, I'm trying to put my foot up. I got a joint disease. I apologize. So like sometimes I get in pain and I have to move things around. Yeah, I was just throwing that out there. It's like, I'm not trying to be weird. Well, that was weird. Spring up randomly. But anyways, but you see what I'm saying? Like I agree with you that like the idea that just because we act like free will exists doesn't mean it exists, and it's actually a pretty poor argument. And I will also admit that like I'm a bit of a neophyte in my grounding of free will. I know I'm going to get comments when I post this video from my objectivist friends. They're going to be like, how fucking dare you? You had a chance to SDL and you fucking fumbled because you don't believe in... It's like, I don't fucking know what to tell you, man. Fucking, I'm not that smart. Pick somebody smarter to have these conversations. I just happen to be smarter than the other libertarians that are having them. So it's fucking your fault. But again, like if it invalidates all morality, right? Then like to say, well, it's not a strong claim because I can imagine a world where morality doesn't exist. It's like, it's kind of that's a fucking cope if I've ever heard one. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Sure. I didn't want to get into like, I mean, I think that the argument again for morality as well is like, well, we can't observe the morality particles. The derivation from first principles doesn't work except based on stuff like performative contradiction. And even the performative contradiction, like if we run it all the way back in a non-free will universe, all it does is tell you that people have preferences which are inconsistent with their long-term goals. Okay, that doesn't prove there's like a moral fact of the matter. It just proves that people might be inconsistent little gits, for example. Like, yeah, again, I mean, so I'm trying to say, like, sorry. I think the line of logic has to run here something like free will exists and that people's actions indicate their true moral respect for something like self-ownership in an absolute sense, which is why they pursue argument instead of violence.
That's a fact.
And
that's a fact. You can't argue against that.
Because The arguments I've
accept
given,
free will exists, if you accept free will exists and you accept human action based off of that, then everything you else said logically derives from it. There's no logical argument against it, right? Because the thing is that you're saying, well, this person, like you loaded it up, right, to make it sound silly, right? Which is that every action shows their kind of like their moral preferences against all domains, etc., right? But that's what it means if you establish an ethical norm, right? An ethical norm you can't be true in 1 minute and untrue in another. And what you're attempting to do is you're saying, well, it's okay for me because in my head I've deviated my actions now as like separate under different contexts and therefore no longer applying to actions later. But that doesn't. But it doesn't matter that you've created a belief to justify it, to kind of like try and rationalize against your own behavior that is contradictory.
I feel like this is getting at like a deontological versus or consequential intuition of how morality works. Like if you ask the utilitarian, why are you killing this person now? And they said they're a murderer, but you're saving someone else in the hospital later and because they're not a murderer or whatever. Like they would just say, well, because the outcomes were different. Like, of course my actions were different because the consequences they had were different. I was following different rules. Kill murderers, don't kill non-murderers, something like that.
Yeah, this is obviously so I mean, like, it doesn't necessarily counteract consequentialism under all domains, right? Because it's natural law is an ethical system that says you can't do these things, right? It doesn't give you moral oughts, like I explained, except for maybe a domain of which moral oughts have to exist in. And so, like, yeah, it overrides consequentialism in those areas because it proves those things to be morally false. But in all of the other areas, it doesn't.
I do just want to note that there are pretty, in my view, solid arguments that deontological views can be consequentialized, meaning that, like, why is it that XYZ action should be taken in every possible outcome? Well, it's because it yields some outcome that I want. And in fact, that, like, well, whatever. I won't get into the consequentialization stuff, but I shouldn't even brought it up. The point is
but that would be the problem with you bringing it up it becomes a mirror of what you accused me of doing in the beginning of the debate, which is that you have a moral philosophy such as man acts, and then you said, well, then now you're ascribing hunger to the man acts situation. So you would be doing the exact same thing you were accusing me of, which is you took a belief system and then you integrated it into consequentialism to then utilize it and adopt that. You're moving after the fact as opposed to before. Let's
actually go in a bit on that. So pulling back from the morality underneath it all, right? So the reason we got onto this is because I think that you can fairly prove via a little bit of observation and a bunch of logic that people have preferences and they act on them. Okay, the argument that I've been giving is that there's a bunch of gaps that can't be crossed here. One is the is-ought gap. There is no, like, I don't think there's any way to cross that. We tried, but tabling that for the minute. The second argument was
we didn't establish conflict, which is an incredibly important part of even understanding ethical systems. Is that we didn't get.
We
into
talked
conflict.
About scarcity. I don't know if you're trying to talk about some.
Well, you saw scarcity on a paper and kind of jumped ahead, which is fine. But yeah, we didn't get into conflict and how conflict occurs over scarce resources, et cetera, so that we could better substantiate and understand why.
I mean, I would just note that even stuff like, hey, resources are scarce, in my view, even at that level, you need empirical observation. We could live in a world where everyone has preferences and there's abundance enough for everyone. Imagine that we were all like brain stapled. All of us were brought down 50 IQ points. We're monkeys again. And we live in a world where, like, the AI overlords give us all infinite bananas. That's a world where people act on preferences, and also those preferences are probably relatively pretty dumb.
So I mean, right. So you would have to go. And it's interesting that you said we move our IQ down, because even in a quote unquote post-scarcity world, right, one thing that is scarce is human thought and human action, right?
Sure.
So even if every imaginable, like, we have a magic machine that
could
creates
be wrong.
whatever resource.
It could be true that we live in an infinitely large universe where there's infinitely many humans, right? So there's no scarcity of human thought. There's no scarcity of resources.
No,
these are things you cannot derive from pure reason.
You're getting out of the domain of a material reality, right? Like, because now you're talking about infinity, right? And infinity is not a measurable thing within the material world. So
why would you have to measure it? This is from first principles. I'm saying from first principles, you can't logically prove that the world is finite.
even so, like, even then it still wouldn't matter, because you would also have to make it to where travel is instantaneous. And when I mean instantaneous, time no longer exists, because even if there was an infinite amount of human minds, they would have to be able to travel to and communicate ideas instantaneously outside of the constraint of time. So now you're talking about a world that materially is infinite and no longer exists within time. And again, I feel like you're fucking coping and stretching to get to this like post-scarce world where like things kind of work, right? Sure, we can do questions in an evenly rotating economy as like a thought experiment, but they don't match reality, which is hilarious coming from the person that's utilizing empiricism as a means to fucking come at me, right? Like, it's kind of hilarious that you're engaged in a post-scarce, post-time,
I'm not trying to argue the
world.
Like, this is what I'm trying to argue is simply that it's very hard to prove the types of scarcity that actually exist, stuff like scarcity of food and water and whatnot, from pure reason. You do not know the needs that people have starting off, right? Like, it could be possible that we exist as minds that telepathically communicate. Space is no barrier. We could exist in a world where light is infinitely fast. You cannot know these things.
You're showing the problems of socialism, why socialism is evil, right? Like, you're proving
that's true. Socialism can only work if light.
Right. You're proving that scarcity is something that requires investigation, that we're not automatically aware of scarcity. And so how do we solve scarcity? Well, the socialist has the commissar utilizes stolen tax money to try and investigate where resources ought be allocated, and assume that these people who are lacking information will make the best choices for the people as they violate their consent in their bodies. And it is the capitalist that says that the best means of doing so, and recognizing that scarcity is a thing, and recognizing that our information of scarcity is limited, is that the price mechanism solves the economic calculation problem in a much better way, and the local knowledge problem, right? So,
let's pivot towards that, actually. So the types of proofs that we have derived from first principles so far, if we accept like the brunt of your argument, it's that people have preferences, they act upon them, and the non-aggression principle is like a moral truth. Let's just take the preferences. The fact that people act on preferences, we both agree, does not mean that they are acting for the benefit of themselves necessarily. If you, for whatever how you want to define benefit, it is possible that a preference is at odds with that benefit, whether by chance or by like malformed preferences or whatever. I'm not going
to let you slip that in, right? That like, because so yes, you could argue that given additional that you can. Okay, I'll write it down. So I'm sorry.
Let's say that some preferences might not be optimal, but even accepting that all preferences are like towards the personal's optimality and society's optimality, we arrive at a very simple problem. It's collective action problems. So the classic leftist argument is that there are cases where forcing people to cooperate leads to a world where everyone is better off than a world where people voluntarily chose not to cooperate, which they would choose to do rationally, preferentially every time. So an obvious example is like education.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just an obvious example is education. The huge benefit of education is returned to society. People's incomes are raised something like 5 times by getting high school degrees, to college degrees, to whatnot, have huge benefits. And the benefit of those do not mostly accrue to either the school or the person, but they are external to the person. They are positive externalities, or they are positive spillovers. So it is very hard for a market, this is the classic neoclassical argument, not even a socialist one, that a market cannot fully account for these because the person who is paying for the education is not receiving all of the benefit of that education. They would not be willing to pay enough to receive the full benefit. So it should be subsidized.
Okay. So we have quite a few things in here, right? We have a refutation of preference. And then you kind of like, we were like, well, even if, and then you kind of accepted the premise, right? But, just to nail that down a little bit, right? So you are correct that the way you're doing it is you're kind of like, let me explain. You are correct that, let's say person A makes a decision, a market decision, or to consume a product, to buy a service, etc. Right? And in the future, if they had better knowledge, let's say they're dumb and then they learn from their mistakes or something, they would not have made that bad or poor decision, right, with their money. Or maybe in that moment they were drunk, or maybe it's a bad idea to, buy lottery tickets when you have an electric bill to pay, right? You know what I mean? Like that people act in what you would colloquially call non-rational ways, which is to say that they're acting in their own rational self-interest as defined, post hoc, kind of like subjectively, right? Like, and these are subjective metrics that we can kind of all kind of agree, right? Like we can recognize that like what's important to one person isn't necessarily important to another. And at the same time, we can recognize that like grandma's probably not going to be happier or more fulfilled in her life if she, sends a $1,500 to the Nigerian guy, right? You know what I mean? Like that's probably not her actual preference, right? Obviously that would be fraud. So that's a different conversation, but nevertheless, well, let's say buying lottery tickets. That's not fraud, right? As opposed to paying your electric bill. So I can recognize that idea is that there are bad things. The problem isn't with that conception. It is an attack on the concept of rational actor, right? And it is a bit of a sneaky one because it slips in, a different usage of the terms, right? One is talking about rational self-interest and an immediate psychic profit, right? And it's kind of an amoral claim. And then yours is imposing a moral claim based off of negative consequences in the back, right? You follow me? Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah,
okay, so I just want to make sure I'm not like I want to try and steel man. I want to talk shit, but I still want to make sure I'm not getting your argument wrong. Okay, so that's
sure. No, I'm agreeing. We do cross the Izot gap. That's in fact the argument here that like we are merely from first principles. The fact that people act on preferences is not sufficient to conclude those preferences are worth respecting. Like that's part of the argument,
right? And so your argument is I know better than you what market decisions you should be making because I have a better system of ascertaining that than does grandma who buys lottery tickets instead of paying her fucking electric bill, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here's the problem with that is that you may be correct accidentally. You may be wrong, right? It's very difficult to determine what interactions the state puts as it imposes its will upon people and upon the market, right? So we have unintended consequences, number one, right? So, a great example of unintended consequences. So this is just problem one with your idea that a collective group of supposed intellectual superiors are going to use a subjective value ordered system that's better than grandma's because grandma is dealing with information failures and we're smarter, right? So problem one is unintended consequences, right? So like a great example of unintended consequences is like this hypothetical thing that's occurred in a couple of countries, right? Is like the snake problem. Have you heard of the snake problem?
Is that like a problem with too many snakes or an actual category problem?
No, it's a hypothetical that has happened in a couple of countries, right? So it's been local areas and like there are myths about it that, like kind of draw it out of proportion, right? So I'll treat it as a hypothetical because it is only happened in a couple of small areas. But
this is the one where it's people raise snakes to sell for the purpose. There's a snake eradication program.
Yeah. This is snake
bring in snake.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a great example of that, but it's kind of a debunk. Like it's not a real serious unintended consequence. So like a better one might be making sesame seeds. The FDA changing sesame seeds in terms of the allergen, right? This happened recently. So it used to be that just 2 years ago, right? Sesame seeds were not in an allergen category as far as the FDA was concerned. So if you had sesame seeds in your product, you had to put like product may contain sesame seeds, right? That would be in the back. So if people were allergic to sesame seeds, they would look at the product and go, it's not in the ingredients, but it's in the same factory as a place with sesame seeds. So like if I have a severe allergy, I should avoid this. But if I have a mild allergy to sesame seeds, fuck it, I'll grab it. I'll probably be fine, right? I might end up with a sesame seed. It's not a big deal, right? Well, the FDA had to fucking change this because lo and behold, the government needed to get involved in this fucking in this to save the ones of people dying a year from sesame seeds, right? And so the government gets involved and they're like, well, I mean, we'll just make it to where, if you have that in your product, you have to list it. Well, see, the unintended consequences, and this is the problem with all state action, is that unlike the market, it has to pay for information that is readily available in competition and price. And so, because of that, what the state does is when they did this, all of these factories realize that sesame seeds are really fucking small, and so they might accidentally put sesame seeds in a product, even though it's not supposed to be in that product at all. So they just changed the recipes for all their fucking products at every factory that has sesame seeds. And they added a minuscule amount of sesame seeds to all products. And then it's just an illicit ingredient. So now people with sesame seed allergens can't fucking eat anything. Like if you eat chips, if you eat anything, they all contain sesame seeds now in a minuscule amount if they're built in a factory that has like crackers or anything. This is an unintended consequence of state action, right? So that would be like argument one as to why, even though grandma isn't acting in her own self-interest, your action comes with unintended consequences that are a burden on the market and people, and of course, would require violation of free will.
So very early on in this conversation, I mentioned that the credibility revolution has been enormously influential in economics and has helped partly shift it leftward because it relies on quasi-experiments and natural experiments. So one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is that unintended consequences, and more generally, like perverse incentives for people based on government action, incentives for people to do a bad action and unwanted action, these are the type of thing that you can derive when you're trying to run something like a natural or quasi-experiment. And the point that what I would just point to is, I'm sure, like it is definitionally true that there will be bad regulations. At the same time, that does not mean that regulations are on net bad or that society is worse with them than without, right? Like I just want the fact that some fail is not a proof that enough fail for it to be bad.
ANCAPs are not against regulation in the market. We're all for regulation in the market. We just don't want it to be done by a state entity that is lacking the same information as is the market, right?
Sure, but it's
definitionally going to be less effective than the market.
Well, so that's the problem here, is that that's not clearly true. So like when we look at stuff like, say, basic research spending was a paper that I was reading on recently. Basic research spending from the public government. The percentage of research spending that comes from the public has dropped over the past 50 years as governments from like basically neoliberals and as the Cold War wound down and Reagan dropped federal government R&D spending. But even despite that, the government spends about, I think it's half of all of the basic research in this country. And the basic research that the government funds is something like 2 times more effective at generating positive spillovers than private spillovers are, just based on data sets of firms who innovate versus those who don't. And again, I know you can tell me like, hey, maybe that's just a model. Maybe the model doesn't reflect reality. But what I'm trying to get at is like, let's imagine that it is actually true that there's some set of government funded good which does better than the private funded alternative per cost. Why would we oppose that from an ANCAP view beyond the non-aggression principle?
Well, okay, so first of all, it is a violation of the non-aggression principle. So like beyond the non-aggression principle, why would I use a weaker ANCAP argument? Well, why wouldn't I use the stronger? Like because there's a couple of things baked into the question. The question is, number one, let's assume that Austrian economics is wrong, and that Hayek is wrong, and that the local knowledge problem is wrong, and the economic calculation problem is wrong.
This isn't the local knowledge or economic calculation. This is just positive
government
spillovers.
Right. This is the government, right, utilizing funds towards utilizing scarce resources that it took from people, right, to gain some form of outcome via a government program, even if that government program is just funding, which is something the government tends to do better than like its own programs, obviously, right? It's easier for the government to write a check than to like run a DMV. And that's like, that shouldn't be controversial. Bless you. Are you, that's so many.
Yeah.
So many sneezes, right? So we're assuming the economic calculation.
All the demons coming out of your argument, okay?
Well, it's right. I mean, it's slightly better than, I'm allergic to bullshit, but I do appreciate the religious undertones to match your previous religious statements.
Of course.
Of course. But no. So you're saying this isn't a local knowledge problem. How is it not a local knowledge problem if the government is choosing who to fund based off of research grant proposals, right? So the government is making decisions about where resources should be allocated for public interest, right? So that
what I'm trying to get. Sorry, maybe I should be more clear. I'm claiming that the local knowledge problem, like I'm a market socialist. I generally think the local knowledge problem applies. There are reasons to have markets. However, that does not mean that markets are better at everything. That's the argument I'm trying to present. And the question I'm asking you is like, how do you know the local knowledge problem is so true in either every case or so many cases that it defeats the utility of stuff like public funded schools or public funded research when the evidence on these seems to be so overwhelmingly positive? Like that's what I'm trying to get at.
So I mean,
why do you
first of all, I absolutely disagree with the idea that the evidence is overwhelmingly positive, right? When you just admitted as part of your argument that 50% of all public funding is coming from the government, and you're saying the evidence from research that at a minimum half of it, the money is coming from the state, says that the state good. Right, like so already there's kind of a bit of a bias thing. You know what I mean? Like how much research are state institutions funding that are anti-state? Right? I don't know that that is a thing. To be fair, though, I will say that private research probably is often specifically targeted to be anti-state or against state concepts. Right? Whereas a lot of state research will be like you know. Fucking Amazonian frog mating patterns or something, right? Like it has utility, but it presumably, right? But this is what you might consider like a negative externality because it has no like market value currently or whatever, right? But like maybe there is some value 100 years from now in knowing the mating patterns of frogs because it helps us figure out kukuri or some shit and like. I don't know, fucking some analgesics, general analgesics and medicine research or something, whatever. And so, like, I will give you that, like, Koch brothers isn't funding a lot of fucking frog research, right? Like, most of their research is going to be like, why is, fucking California wrong, right? Like, so I get that there is a counterbalance there, but nevertheless, like, you kind of you've already admitted a bias.
I want to be clear. I'm not talking about like NGOs, like Koch brother funded stuff. We're talking in this instance. This is a data set of firms, basically, and the point found in this data set was that public funded research yielded larger spillover effects, meaning larger productivity gains than private R&D for the same dollar value. Like this is not like government research as in all government funding of every research university everywhere. In particular, I was highlighting basic research as like one that is particularly key. The government has been overwhelmingly the main funder of basic research for a century now, like literally a century since FDR. Yeah. And that's because it is very, very, very unprofitable to fund research very far down the pipeline. And so like the obvious question is like, okay, if we cut off government basic research funding, you would basically be cutting basic research and funding by say a third. So not a third, by in half.
So this is the problem of empiricism, right? In economic studies, right? Like, which is kind of getting back to the crux of the argument, right? Is that what you are comparing a world that occurs in time, right? You have established a historical fact, but what you haven't compared is a world with and a world without, right? So you're saying, well, if government is doing better at this thing in this specific time, and I have established this historical fact, right? Therefore, the evidence suggests that government's actually better at this than the private market. And I was going to read this quote to you earlier, but I think it's a fun quote, and I think it like really kind of like encapsulates what I'm talking about. So this is from von Mises in I think this is Human Action. If a statistician determines that a rise of 10% in the supply of potatoes in Atlantis at a definite time was followed by a fall of 8% in the price, he does not establish anything about what happened or may happen with a change in the supply of potatoes in another country or at another time. He has not measured the elasticity of demand of potatoes. He has established a unique and individual historical fact. And so the same thing is true even if I take that research study, like, because I'm not, unless we go into it now and like go over the methodology and et cetera, and see like what they omitted and what they didn't do, we might find that it's just that is bullshit. But assuming it's true, again, it's just a historical fact. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that like the local knowledge problem is wrong. It's just empiricist bullcrap, and
So
that doesn't apply to economics.
okay, so this has sort of been underneath a lot of the discussion of empiricism. How do you decide whether a economic model is true or false under your worldview? Like, let's say that I claim that minimum wages actually raise unemployment.
Right.
Why is that model true or false? Why does the fact that, say, XYZ evidence lines up with the model not mean that we should just accept this model and reject the Austrian model? What evidence, if ever presented, could lead you to reject the Austrian model of economics?
Right, because I can logically derive that that's not true, right? Via praxeology. We walk through it all the way up to
people have preferences. We got to people have preferences.
People have value orders, they choose those values, right? And then the next part is that there is a supply and demand, right? That supply and demand is made up of, in a market economy, all other things being equal, is made up of individuals that choose, right? Okay, go ahead. You seem perturbed by this.
Yes, we've gotten to the point of supply and demand. What I've been trying to ask is, I point to something like collective action problems, right? And
you brought up minimum wage, and you said, how could I falsify it? I'm about to falsify it.
Well, so what I'm trying to get to a broader sense is, how do you cross the gap between...
Why a broader sense? You asked me a question, and I can prove it to be logically untrue, and now you're like, nah, don't do that.
Because we have gotten to the point in the logic where you have said people have preferences, right? Mm-hmm. I asked, okay, what about stuff like collective action problems? How do we know that these preferences are aligning in a way which is socially optimal? Because collective action problems are a clear example where everyone's preferences could be socially optimal in and of themselves, but socially unoptimal as a group.
Okay,
right?
Either I continue with the minimum wage thing, or you just drop it and say you're wrong. And then we can get a collective action, right? Because you're trying to like stop me from making the minimum wage thing. Like you don't, like you made an argument about like, how could you possibly know? And I'm like, well, I could answer. And then you're like, yeah, but answer other questions. Like,
no. So just how this argument went is, I brought up that there's not a clear link between preferences and rationality.
Yeah, then I wrote it down, right? Like you brought up preferences, and then you brought up not optimal, and then you brought up collective action. I wrote down negative externalities, right? Because that's a better way of the proper term, right? Then you talked about education, and then I walked up that I want to talk about early American child labor laws, since we're using empiricism as a means of things, right? And then now we're on a conversation about minimum wage. Like I'm writing down the points you're making, but do you want me to go through the points in order, or do you want me to go through the points as you bring them up? Like
I'm trying to go back to the point that you raised. So you brought up perverse incentives, and I was trying to bring up that, like, hey, yes, government action can be bad, but there's a difference between saying government action can be bad and saying that it is bad on net or bad in all instances, which is the argument that ANCAPs have to raise, that it is like unoptimal in all or virtually all instances, such that you should never want government action. And the reason I'm bringing up stuff like collective action is as an example where I don't even need to say, are people being irrational? People could be perfectly rational. I could accept that premise. I could accept the existence of supply and demand, of course. I can accept all of these things and still conclude that coercion would be better for average person's well-being.
Okay. So setting the minimum wage thing, write it down. All right. We'll get back to that, because I can prove minimum wage. We'll go to collective action. All right. Now, you gave up the example of education. I think education is a fine example. We can talk about that. I think a better example is probably climate change, both of our perspectives, right? But I mean, which would you prefer? I stay with education, or would you prefer I switch to climate change? Or we can do both.
I mean, so I gave research as an example, but education works too.
Well, okay. Well, so now, okay. Well, we were talking about research, right? But you also gave education as an example in your first argument, right? So okay. So we'll stick with research, right? Right. So in terms of the research, I think I established again that you have established a historical fact, right? And that's fine that you've established an historical fact. But again, you're not comparing it to a world, right, where the government isn't stealing 50% of all the fucking wealth in the country, right? So it's very difficult to, right? So when you say that this thing is good in this period of time, go ahead.
Do you think that these have to be examined all as one, or can we examine a policy one at a time? Like I'm methodologically, why do you think
I think it's similar. I think
the whole world?
I think, what do you mean? No.
You're
The
saying,
problem is time. The problem is not world versus world. The problem is time. The problem is that subjectivism is absolutely true at an individual level in market choices. And the thing is that when you use a period of time to study interactions within the market, right? And what you do is that people's actions change because of over time, right? People's what it is that they prefer to purchase, what it is that they prefer to sell, and they're dependent upon a multitude of variables, right? So the effectiveness of research is gonna be based off of inflation, right? So it's also going to be based off of market volatility, right? So what type of research I, as a company or an institution investing in the private market, is going to change if I imagine my business as heading into a really volatile market for 10 years versus if I imagine my business heading into a stable market for 10 years, right? So there's all of these differences that can occur that make it nothing more than a mere historical fact that in this moment, the research shows that there was higher return from government research grants in these specific private firms in this period of time.
Okay, maybe a more broad question then. Do you think that there can be derived anything but historical facts in any social science? Or can social sciences derive a model which is true and accurately describes the underlying circumstance from empirical reasoning alone?
From empirical reasoning alone, right? So not from other means of... Because obviously I would...
There's some logic
obviously
involved.
I agree. No, I mean, obviously I would say that praxeology, is able to accurately depict economic factors and outcomes and laws that influence our understanding of economics, right? So I mean, like,
sure.
so
I'm trying to say, like, in a broader sense, right? All of the arguments you give that, hey, we exist in this world and it's so complicated. Oh my gosh, a business heading into a world where there's government investing, where there's one that isn't. How could you possibly compare the two? That argument applies to like everything in sociology and everything in psychology as well. Mm-hmm, so do you think it's possible
to isolate sciences? Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Do you think it is ever possible to build a model that is true or correct or truth apt, whatever word you want to give to it, in any soft science?
So I would say first of all, truth can be accidentally discovered, right? You can accidentally be right without knowing you're right, right? So
sure.
Just hear me out. So hear me out. Like your grandma could be like, the same grandma that like loves drinking Jim Beam and buying lottery tickets and doesn't pay her electric bill, right? She could just be purely right about something on chance, right? And you could be like, fucking all right, and you could be talking to her at the dinner table and she'd be wrong about everything else, and this one thing she's right, and you're like, fucking, I can't argue with that, grandma. You're right. Your reasoning is completely wrong, but you're right, right? So you could be completely right on that. And so I think when you talk about empiricism, and again, you talk about things that have predictability, right? So like I use a model, and when I use this model over and over and over and over and over again, repeated in different times, you can't isolate variables. So you can't really know for certain, right, that this is what's going on. And it could be a hotshot fallacy, right, where we assume that there's a factor we're ignoring the entire time, or that we're unaware of, and that factor could randomly change, and then the predictability could instantaneously evaporate, and we would just be wrong and not know why. But nevertheless, many of these things have been shown to have repeatability and predictability, right? And so there's a kind of like an approximation one does in their head that says this is probably true, right? Like this is evidence seems to support this thing. That is all empiricism is that empiricism says that evidence supports, and it doesn't make truth claims. Sometimes they try to make truth claims, but like
earlier,
but yeah.
Way earlier in the conversation, we agreed that science has an ability to tend towards truth. Insofar as social sciences have an ability to disprove theories which are in disalignment with reality, would we not expect that these models tend towards truth? Especially when we're talking about like again, we're talking about some of the strongest causal evidence that economics has ever been able to marshal in its history. There have been more causal studies in the last 5 years than the last 500.
Like, yeah, so I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, like we've gotten more sophisticated models in research, and of course we've proven things to be true that are unequivocally false, right? Like current like Krugman and one other guy, I think, just got like a Nobel Prize, I think, for proving that that minimum wage increases don't have a downward pressure on employment, which is just provably not true. Like, we know that logically it can't be true, and yet they're winning Nobel Prizes for things that are provably not true.
But this is actually a good example.
The numbers said so.
Well, yeah, because the numbers say so across causal studies. We literally, minimum wage is perfect because this is a one where I think there are literally 15,
you can't use economic studies to determine causality.
There are literally 1,500 causal studies on minimum wages that we're talking about nowadays in modern meta studies, and the average effect they find on unemployment is nil. It's like minus 0.01, not significant. So to me, that seems like, hey, every time we've examined this causally, not every time, on average, when we've examined this causally, the effect is nil. Why would we therefore conclude that our logic must be right? Well, why would we not say, hey, this model aligns with everything we've observed? Why is it not this is probably closer to truth?
Two reasons. The first reason being that, again, empiricism is utilizing pattern recognition to attempt to ascertain the truth, just like ChatGPT, right? If I'm an expert on something and I know that something's wrong, ChatGPT might be wrong, right? But ChatGPT is better than the average person, right? You muted yourself.
How do you know? How do you know that? Yeah, I am getting mad. How do you know that
you wouldn't let me.
Is right? No.
You wouldn't let me fucking. You wouldn't let me fucking get to it. You kept fucking telling me I had to go back to fucking collective action when I kept wanting to talk about minimum wage. Did you not? Like, were you not like, no, let's go back to education. Let's go back to research studies. Now you brought it back to minimum wage. Am I going to be allowed to talk about minimum wage, or are we going to go back to collective action? Like, how many times are we going to bounce back and forth? Come on.
Shoot, go ahead. Yeah, talk about minimum wage.
Right. So I mean, we talked about empiricism, right? We, like, you recognize that you believe it gets closer to truth, right? It's important that you recognize a hotshot fallacy, right? That even if something is shown to be true over and over and over again, if you're not actually determining causality, you're only looking at
But these patterns. Are all causal studies. That's
it doesn't fucking matter. You can't determine causality that way. Because you can't isolate variables. You can't just call it a fucking causal study.
If you think that social sciences are sciences, why do you think that it's not possible to determine causality in economics? Because that's what you're saying. You're saying something that we've studied 1,500 times cannot possibly be causally correct, right? Okay. So how could I ever trust that?
You're getting debate broy on me, all right? All right, that's fine. No, I'm trying to explain this, right? I'm trying to explain this. So the first thing is the hotshot fallacy. Right? You understand that. So that's fine. We'll move on. The second thing to understand is that you cannot determine causality. You can only determine an historical fact. Just calling it, just because it's a really complicated study, right, with a fairly high degree of predictability, doesn't make it a causal study magically. It's not even a randomized controlled trial, which is better in sociology and psychology, right? You're even less likely to get accurate information that it isolates variables in economic studies.
Okay, so just to get at this very directly, what do you think the difference between any of the causal methods used, like IV, DID, whatever, in economics is from other economic studies?
So what is the difference between the causal studies in economics and the non-causal studies in economics?
Yes, because you're saying essentially they can't actually derive causality. So what do you think the difference is, and why does it not lead to causal inference?
So I guess I don't quite understand your question, because I don't think either of them are capable of causal things. So I guess you're trying to test my knowledge of how the economic studies are done for like a gotcha moment. Is like I'm just curious. Well, no, like I don't understand what the question is. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Sure. So the methods I'm referring to are called differences in differences. I'm forgetting. I would have mentioned the name, but there's a formalized better method of it recently. Anyway, differences and differences and instrumental variable analysis. And so differences and differences, what it tries to do is, the way you can think of it is you take two cases, one case where an event occurs and one case where an event does not occur. So an example would be a minimum wage law is passed in a county or it is not passed in a county. And you compare that county to the other county. Which
differences and differences, we changed those in the 90s, but it's fine.
Well, I'm just that's how we start. And then modern models extrapolate on that by not comparing one case to another case, but by comparing one case to an amalgamation of like 15 million other cases, which were matched based on how similar they were, which is strengthening this analogy. So you have something which looks like the Frankenstein of the exact same county versus the actual county. How did employment change? And employment doesn't change for shit. So to me, this seems to be as close as you're ever going to get for accounting for every other factor that you could think of that's causing.
So we used to do differences in cities and states that were similar, right? So you would do New York City would have an increase, and then you would have you might do like Chicago or something, right? And then and we found over and over and over and over and over again, that the research showed that when you increase minimum wage, it affects the labor market. It was like hundreds of studies that showed the differences studies as you're describing them, right? And then in the late 90s and early 2000s, we were like, well, what we really should do is we should do things that are like more communally, like similar, right? Because it's problematic to compare like New York and Chicago, even though they might have like similar racial metrics or they might have similar economic metrics, et cetera. There's a very different culture. They're affected by different state laws, et cetera. And so then what would happen is you would do like New York compared to like northern New Jersey, right? And then what they ended up finding was that there was more variance, but that they were more likely to say that there was no effect, right? Modern studies, as you're talking about, what they do is they attempt to grab every demographic piece of information that they possibly can and then create like a computer simulation of the exact same city, but without this difference. So you're doing the best that you can with technology and modern research programs to get to the kind of the praxeological statement, right? Of like all other things being equal.
I just want to say there are also a significant number of other methodologies. So there are very few places where minimum wages have been rolled out randomly, but there are places where the rise in the minimum wage has been pseudo-random. So for example, there are places where there wasn't, say, a federal minimum wage in Germany, and then there was a federal minimum wage, but there were previously state level minimum wages. And so the raises were very different based on different states. And so we exploit the differences there. And again, it's very easy to point to, hey, there's a bunch of other things that could differ between these states. I'm just trying to say that all of your methodological concerns are true. Nothing that we're saying here is absolute truth, but we're coming as close as possible in all of these methodological approaches, DID, and I don't know of any IV instrumental variable minimum wage studies, but whatever. I'm just trying to say, like, all of your concerns, hey, maybe there's another confounder. Maybe there's another cause of the change here. Doesn't seem to work when we have such a large number of causal studies in so many different places, accounting for so many variables. Right. It requires there to be an unobservable across all of these instances, right? Which is just as absurd the number we're talking about.
Right. You believe that you can override logic via empiricism that is based on, and this is a problem, right? This is an issue. Like, I understand it seems silly. It's like these big brain people, they've developed these models, and these models say from these big brain people over and over and over again that you're wrong. Like, why do you still cling to the fact that you're right in this situation? The logic that you haven't let me walk through, right? But it's fine. Like, you ought to be able to figure it out in your head anyways at this point from the amount of conversations we've had, which is very simple, right? That there must be a downward pressure on the labor market when you increase minimum wage. It can't. Now hear me out. I want to get through this, right? Because you say over and over and over again, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. And here's the interesting thing about how empiricism and models like this can, stop it, relax, olive branch time. They can, right, show what might not be a flaw in your logic, but also it is also true that sometimes, right, that you see this evidence over and over and over again, and it challenges your assertion over and over and over again. And you go, maybe there's something else that I'm forgetting or that isn't being captured, right? And so what I would surmise is a hypothesis, right? We should test this hypothesis via empiricism, right? But I would test, because I have no problem with utilizing empiricism. I just have a problem with saying that it can override actual truth derived from logic. So what I would say is that what seems to be the thing is that I notice a trend in economic studies on minimum wage specifically, where a lot of the older studies, there was large gaps in minimum wage, right? Minimum wage would jump up pretty significantly. And modern ways that minimum wage rolls out, that the state rolls out, tends to be much more incremental than it was before. Furthermore, I would also state that the state's minimum wage has been kind of on a back burner in a lot of countries, European countries, but especially like America, has been on the back burner in terms of keeping up with inflation and cost of living. And so we do know for a fact that it can be logically derived that minimum wage increase, a price floor, is going to price people out. It can't not, right? Like if someone makes $2 an hour at a job, and then minimum wage is instantly made to $4 an hour. You haven't changed the value of labor of the person that was making $2 an hour. And so at some point, some of those people, their labor is no longer worth the price floor. Like it can't be anything but that. But how bad is that effect? And so I would surmise that many of these studies, what they're not appropriately capturing is either, like almost all of them are going to be adjusted for inflation. But I don't know that all of them are accurately showing the actual change in value of labor, which is basically impossible to determine over time in terms of the labor market and the actual demand within the labor market, right? Like there's a lot of other factors too, which they do account for, like, how many people have dropped out of the labor market, the labor participation rate, et cetera. But I don't think that they're accurately determining the changes in the value of labor. And I would wonder if that might be the confounding variable.
So you mentioned a bunch of confounders. Just to briefly go through them,
Most of them are going to be, like I said, they're going to be tracked.
Well,
like inflation and labor participation rate, for sure.
One of them would be inflation. Studies of inflation and minimum wages generally find that it's really small, something like 100 times smaller to 50 times smaller than the amount of the wage raised. I can send some studies on that. You mentioned a confounder of
no, pause. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying the minimum wage is causing the inflation, right? Which it is going to be minimal. It is going to cause it to some degree, but often not. I'm talking about the fact that minimum wage hasn't kept up with inflation rate.
Yes,
and the actual value of the market, which I said also they would account for in most studies, anyways.
So
but again,
in a lot of studies,
inflation isn't a one-to-one science either.
Well, so pulling back a little bit from that, then, I was just going to go through the list and say those don't clearly work. But what I wanted to point to is that there is also a competing logic for minimum wages. You were pointing to the very simple classic demand curve that companies demand X labor at this amount at this price, and therefore, since you're raising the price, companies will demand less labor. But one of the, again, interesting empirical observations that we've seen from the research on minimum wages is that minimum wages do cause unemployment in competitive, well-functioning labor markets. But they don't cause unemployment in less competitive labor markets, and they actually increase employment in low-functioning labor markets, which is consistent with the monopsony model of labor, that companies coerce workers by basically they're the only game in town, or there's very few games in town. They lower wages below what they should be. And so in fact, fewer people work than would because they can't afford to work for wages that low. So they leave town, or they just don't work at all because it's below their reserve wage.
What's the other factor in that equation? What's the other monetary factor in that equation? It's a big one when we're talking about low skill, low wage labor.
Price? I actually don't know what you're trying to go for.
Welfare, government aid, government assistance. This is the big factor that interrupts the low wage, low skill market, right? Like Walmart knows they can force you to work for $8 an hour and teach you how to get on food stamps. And then of course they also know that minimum wage hike, some people are just going to drop out of the fucking labor market because it's cheaper to get TANF.
So something that we observed over the last period, the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, is the tightest labor market we've observed in about 20, 30 years. What we observed is that in that tight labor market, when workers have more power to demand higher wages than almost any time in recent memory, they raised wages enormously, which is exactly what minimum wage laws do. They artificially raise wages from companies which are keeping it artificially low. Now that the requirements for labor—
What do you mean they're keeping them artificially low? What do you mean?
They're paying—
What do you mean by artificially low?
So I shouldn't say— they're paying as low as they can based on the ability that they have to—
which they always should do, right? Of course.
Well, yeah.
I
shouldn't say artificially. I should say I should say suboptimally low, because having more people employed, producing more, having higher consumption for everyone is generally a better thing. So what I would just point to is that the explanation we have here is
how
maybe
do
it's
you
welfare.
that? That's silly. That's such a silly thing to just like posit as true.
Well, because we've actually observed it. We've observed that as labor has gotten really scarce, wages have enormously risen, which is exactly in line with what monopsony theory would indicate.
Right. But you could make labor even more scarce and make the market more competitive, right? Like there are plenty of like you just threw away like you're just like, oh, my leftist values are correct, right? Like you could like a Christian could come in here, for example, and talk about women leaving the workforce. And if women left the workforce en masse to like do part-time work, right, you would have a much more competitive labor market, right? But you wouldn't support that. They would, right? Like obviously. Like you wouldn't support like a law, let's say, that says women aren't allowed to work more than 20 hours a week because they need to be home raising children. Right, but it would cause a more competitive labor market that would be good for workers.
Because competitive labor market is not the only thing we care about. I agree. However, I'm trying to say that just from the like when we're debating minimum wage, the things that we always care about are inflation, employment, and wages. And if the employment doesn't go down, if the inflation barely goes up, and wages go in, and I know that you also care deeply about like the poor business owners, which have to pay their workers more, a living wage.
I care about the worker making good money, instead of the government forcing them into poverty. Socialists like you that ruin their lives.
Why do we not? Okay, so again, this is one of those things where it feels like when all the empirical evidence lines up with, I want to pull back a bit. Your argument is, hey, there's this logical model. It's supply and demand. Wages go up, therefore employment goes down. But we don't observe that. And there's a competing model also based on pretty basic logic. Like this has been derived even by people from like Milton Friedman types have been like, yeah, maybe monopsony can explain minimum wage like discrepancy, why wages can go up even though employment doesn't go down. It seems like, hey, here's another logical model. Why should we prefer your logical model to our logical model? That's the argument I'm trying to get at. You say that yours is derived from basic principles, but there is no clear link between people have preferences to there can be no monopsony power, for example.
I'm trying to understand where you think that I don't have where I don't believe that monopsony power in a non-free market economy, right? Where corporations are protected by the state with horrible things like welfare that protect them and things like OSHA and things that, presumably work for workers' rights, but protect large corporations at the behest of competition in the market and helping the little guy. Like, why would I say that doesn't occur, that doesn't have a negative effect?
No.
I would say my solution isn't more government involved in less free market principles because the government caused a problem and now we're going to create this new economic model to talk about how the government caused this problem, which then sells us a solution of more government. Like that's bad.
Yeah, there isn't more government versus less government. I also want more government intervention to break up monopolies because I also want less monopsony power. So yeah, there are multiple solutions to monopsony, but trying to when has monopoly breakup worked?
And name one.
Most of the Bell telephone was an enormous breakup. It was probably bad because it cut basic research funding, but
so the only
it was good for the consumer.
You have a better one? Well, you have one that was created in the 1930s as a government monopoly that they created, and then they split it up, and now we have Verizon and AT&T.
I mean, what was it? It was I'm trying to. It was like the precursors of Exxon, for example. Like it's probably a good thing.
What, Standard Oil?
Yeah, it was that, but it became okay. It's probably a good thing. There's more gas companies.
No, it's not. I don't
actually have many.
These monopoly breakups have never fucking worked, and they've never been good. And every instance that the government has come in to step in, they were already falling apart because monopolies monopsony is a little different when we're talking about the labor market. But monopolies, right, they just don't work. They're short-term things.
So I wanted to stay on a point before we get to the solution to monopsony. You admitted.
I know we still got collective action.
No, you admitted that in a world with a monopsony, the labor market would be affected differently by a rise in wages, right? So why is it not logical to therefore conclude that maybe minimum wages could raise employment?
So you're saying why is it not logical, since we have a mixed market economy, which we know is less effective? That mixed market economy might lead to a different logic because the logic I'm using is one that is based upon a free market, right? and that why wouldn't I then recognize that there might be, I'm fine with recognizing that because human action and choice is limited by the state, right? And that the state violates people's autonomy and rights, that it changes market interactions in such a way that there is a possibility, right? Again, empirical evidence aside, that there is a possibility that the market behaves differently, or that we could use a praxeological approach to understanding how that market would. I'd have to think about it and map it out, the economics of it a little bit more. But you just as easily could derive at that, if that is true, from a praxeological position, right? The empirics of it are kind of irrelevant to where. Yeah, I'd have to map it out, but like, there's no reason that this couldn't be done from an Austrian perspective of looking at state interference in the market and how that changes human behavior.
This it seems like a critical failure of praxeology. Then that you have two possible conclusions. One is that minimum wages will necessarily reduce unemployment. One is that they might raise unemployment. So these are directly contradictory conclusions. And the question is, how do you choose between them? When Friedman spoke,
that's not true. Like,
how do you choose between these conclusions in praxeology?
No, what I was saying is I would have to investigate it. So first of all, I'm not an Austrian economist, right? I'm a fucking ANCAP streamer turned YouTuber.
How would an Austrian economist decide between these conclusions? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Again, I'm not an Austrian economist, but if I were, right, if I were like a great Austrian economist, and there was indeed a logical difference in terms of state involvement, well, that we may be able to look at human behavior and how human behavior has changed, it doesn't invalidate that the position, all other things being equal, right? It can be true, right, that the market is so fascistic, right, that it behaves in such a way that is different than it would in a free market, and that we have to account for those variables when understanding how human choice changes in those things. I still doubt the argument at all in terms of monopsonies, that pressure is overall has an upward pressure on the labor market when you make a price floor. I'd have to look at the research and then kind of like map it out, right? Because again, I'm not an economist, and thinking about it on the fly, I don't want to make any predictions one way or the other, right? But it wouldn't necessarily invalidate one if a market was so fascistic that human behavior was done in such a way that they made different choices.
Well, so what I'm trying to get at is that it sounds like you agree that it is possible in a world with high monopsony power for minimum wages to raise employment.
I mean, anything's fucking possible, dude. But I'm not sticking.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
This is a truth.
If derivation can only tell you that there are three possibilities, minimum wages either raise, lower, or don't affect unemployment, then it sounds like the logical derivation isn't that useful, because you need some way to choose between those conclusions. And how do you choose? It's the empirical evidence, right? Like that's the point. If you can't obviously logically derive one single conclusion, you need a way to choose.
Right,
what
but again,
method
you're talking about the Scotch is really silly because it doesn't make any sense, because you're saying you can't logically choose this, right? Like, I can't on the fly as a non-economist. That doesn't mean that it can't be done. Number one. Number two, again, it doesn't make your system somehow more valuable or more predictive just because when we know for a fact that it can't predict. It only appears to predict. Again, it's hotshot fallacy. It can be 98% right.
How do we know that's only appearing to? No. I want to get you on this. How do we know it's only appearing to predict if you admitted one of the possibilities is what it's predicting? You can't say that prediction is wrong when you know it's possible.
It can be accidentally right, just like your grandmother can be accidentally right. Right?
You can't be saying praxeology could be accidental. Oh my God. You can't be.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that empirical evidence where you cannot isolate variables, where you cannot compare like terms, and instead you use models and mathematics to try and get at a certain to try and reach a conclusion. Sometimes the data is cooked. More often than not, it's not, right? But nevertheless, the problem is that when you're attempting to use something that can establish truth and can't isolate for variables, You can be lucky. You can guess the right things. But the problem is that you don't know what undergirds the predictability of that statement. You're throwing numbers in the dark and seeing what sticks. And you do that enough times, just like you do with Chat GPT, and you get, like I said, a natural language processing model that is better than your typical human at answering questions. But it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean that one of those foundations that you're completely unaware of just instantaneously rots away. And so it's a bad thing to try and make truth claims off of.
So what's frustrating, sorry, I shouldn't say what's frustrating. I agree with everything you said, that models can't be perfectly true. There could be like fallacious data, it could be confounding, all this. At the same time, I ask you how to choose between like which model, and you can't give an answer to that one. Like you can't say
Bullshit.
Clearly.
I didn't.
Well, I know, but that's what I'm trying to say. If you don't have a method for picking models, then of what use is the economic theory? That's
you're throwing things that haven't occurred. What do you mean I don't have a method for picking models? You said there's massive evidence that this thing occurs, right? I say I doubt that. And then you said, is it possible that that your logic could be wrong in a market that is heavily fascistic, and you're utilizing logic that doesn't apply to the market? That doesn't apply to the market, right? Yes, that's fine. It doesn't apply to the market. I said, yes, it's possible that I, the non-economist, right, the person that is just talking about economic theories as they are in terms of my political persuasion on a whole bunch of things that you were online kind of like attacking and like kind of saying things that weren't true, right? And I was like, well, let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Let's discuss. Yes, I, the streamer turned YouTuber that like lost my editor and needs an editing rig, dude in my fucking bedroom, right? Couldn't immediately say with 100% certainty that, oh, I don't know, I'd have to like talk to an expert on this, right? Doesn't mean that I am incapable of doing such a thing, and doesn't somehow magically validate empiricism over logic.
I'm not asking you to, in the moment, be like, I've proved it. I've logically proved that only one of these models are possible. What I've asked you to do, and what you haven't been able to do, is point to the method that you would approve of for choosing between those models. Because the only method that you've pointed to as a possibility is, hey, maybe someone could logically derive that only one of these is possible. Okay, maybe, but the fact is that both of these are possible. Like I would just tell you bluntly, it is like derivable from the exact same premises of supply and demand, that in a monopsonistic labor market, there's a different outcome. If that is possible, if there's no way to disprove that like monopsony exists or whatever, then this is a possible outcome.
Okay, so, well, first of all, the disproving of first you'd have to establish that this monopsony is the actual cause. I mean, like, again, which you can't do with empirical evidence, obviously. You can only establish historical facts. So we don't know any of those claims. And so, yeah, the reason you would prefer praxeological approaches to these is that by understanding human behavior and being able to logically deduce how humans will act in a scenario, so long as they are acting towards their rational preferences, you are able to determine how individuals will act in a market. Now, yeah, there are going to be things that there are going to be limits to what that can tell us. Right? Like that's not going to be able to tell us, what the stock market looks like in 2 years, right? Like and I'm okay with that, right? I'm okay with that. And again, it's very similar to how I would describe the non-aggression principle in terms of moral domains. Is very similar to how I approach Austrian economics, which is that if Austrian economics can show logically that a thing must be true or a thing must be false, right? Then no research predictive model that's establishing historical facts is gonna convince me otherwise, because it's illogical. And it's Chat GPT giving me a wrong answer. More often than not, Chat GPT gives me the right answer. Sometimes it says dumb shit, and I'm like, that's not true. That's fucking, you broke there, right? And that just happens.
Okay, I'll ask maybe two questions, and then I probably need to wrap this up at some point, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long interview. It's fine, or a discussion or whatever.
The first would be, how would an expert, like if there were an expert Austrian economist, and let's say they could not logically prove that one of these models was the only possible one. They could not logically prove that the non-monopsonistic one, and they could not logically prove that just the monopsonistic one was the right one. Therefore, they could not logically prove whether the minimum wage would increase or decrease employment. How would they determine the truth? In a system where they can't make a logical derivation.
They wouldn't, and you wouldn't.
I mean, I would. That's the whole point. I'm picking a model.
You would just claim it. You would just claim a historical fact as a fact of reality and as a fact of human behavior in markets.
Okay, and this is maybe the second
thing. And that's the problem, is that you're not studying human behavior. You're just looking at empirical patterns, saying this pattern has been repeated. And that's okay to say that this pattern has been repeated. Maybe that tells us something. Maybe that's worthy of integrating that pattern as a historical fact. And it allows us to elucidate and discover new possibilities. I'm not against empirical evidence informing the way that we spend time gathering information and making policy decisions, so long as those policy decisions always reduce power and size and scope of the state, but like other decisions, at a private level, right? I'm not against any of those things, but you don't get to just claim truth.
I know, but that's the thing. I'm not claiming absolute truth. I'm claiming that inductively,
right, but
this
you're
is the
saying
probabilistic
it's true.
truth. Well, yeah, I don't want to. We usually don't add. I think that under a probabilistic model, this is 99% true. There's some caveats. Of course, the evidence is weak. There's causal caveats to everything. You just say yeah, it's true, just for the purpose of communication. I get that. Maybe that's the colloquial definition of true. Should I say something else that would make you happy? Like this is in line with the empirical evidence? Because I'll say that too.
This is what you're saying. And it's really simple. And you seem to be. It almost seems silly that you're going in circles about this. I don't know. It seems disingenuous to a certain degree. I don't know. Maybe it isn't. Maybe we're just that fundamentally different, right? In our worldviews. I don't know. But I say A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. And then you bring me 20 empirical studies, right? And 19 of these studies, right? And a different model, right? And 19 of these studies say things that don't deal with A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. Then you bring me a study that has this giant amount of data and models and simulated differences compared to real differences and and all of these different things. It says probabilistically it's super close to the truth, and what it says is that A equals B, B equals C, A does not equal C. But what I'm telling you is I can look you in the fucking face and say that if it says that, it's wrong. It can't be right. If it says A equals B, B equals C, but A does not equal C, it's logically fucking wrong. And that's the only claim praxeology makes, is that there are certain things in human behavior that do occur. And that when your models say that they don't, you're wrong.
So the problem here is not an internal contradiction. It's not A equals B, B equals C, but C doesn't equal A. The problem is that it doesn't work with your previously derived axioms. But the reason that I keep bringing up that, hey, there's another model here, is that I'm trying to bring up that there's a jump. There's some point and a logic jump where you get to preferences and those lead to demand curves. And the fact that demand curves exist does not mean that all demand curves are the same. That's the argument I've been trying to give, that, hey, in a monopsonistic supply and demand curve, higher wages would mean higher employment. So the argument I'm trying to give is this isn't an internal contradiction. It is a different, I would just point to, maybe as an end note in this one, the last study that I sent in your Discord DMs.
My Discord, what?
I've been sending you a few studies through the debate, but I sent you.
Oh, dude, I have not been looking at any of them. I had no idea that you sitting in a mountain of shit. I had no idea.
I know. Don't bother looking at them during the debate. I don't.
I'm so sorry that I've been not seeing this.
No. It's because it's muted when you're in a call, I think, or in stream mode or whatever.
Yeah, I was like, what the fuck?
I'm not trying to do this as an owner or whatever. I'm saying if you want to,
there's so much here. There's so much for anyone watching live or on my YouTube later once I upload. There's so much. There's like three. Like I just scroll through 3 fucking scrolls to get through the shit.
I apologize. Yeah, there's a bunch of images too.
It's fine.
Just the last one that I sent. The last one I set is Azar et al. 2019, and it really indicates well what I'm trying to point to with the monopsony model. That picture that shows up there, what you'll see is that for 3 categories of worker who were affected by a lot of minimum wage increases, for the bottom, the most dense, sorry, not the most dense, the most monopsonistic labor markets, the elasticity of employment with respect to the minimum wage was negative. That's a lot of gobbledygook to say minimum wage went up, employment went up. But you'll notice the elasticity is positive for the top least monopsonistic markets. Those are the most competitive ones. In the most competitive markets, employment went down because of the minimum wage, which is exactly in line with this monopsonistic model. So I'm just trying to point to all this as like, hey, we have a bunch of data, not just on minimum wages not raising employment, but even very specific stuff that like
right. So hold on,
exactly
hold
in line
on,
with
hold on.
monopsonistic predictions.
Let me look at this real quick, right? So just for those watching, like, actually, there's no need. I can share it on the screen, but right. So if I'm looking at this right here, right, what you're seeing is there was a downward pressure on the labor market in the most competitive markets, and in those, like, let's say Walmart or something, right? Like which is the number 1 employer in America. Jesus Christ, fucking hate Walmart. Everybody should stop shopping at Walmart unless you're poor. I know it's my privilege speaking or whatever to all you fucking lefty fucks. I don't give a fuck. Like, just fucking go to Target where all the white women are. All right, come on, just do it. Or somewhere else, you know, if you don't like Target, or your local grocery store. I don't know. Go to farmers market, but those are really expensive. But anyways, right. So again, I'd have to look at the claim of the research, right? And like, I have no problem personally, right, with saying that a market has been captured to such a degree that it's so socialist that it has become that it no longer works upon the logic of free market principles. Again, I'd have to look at this research. It's just a fucking picture right now, and I'd have to look at it, right? But even still, if that were the case, like, it wouldn't change. It might change the claims of like unemployment, right? But it still wouldn't change the understanding of the claims, right? So like if for example, like we go back to a supply and demand curve, right? We go back just one step, you know, in terms of the logic tree, and we look at it and we realize that, well, why is it that the monopsonies, right, where a town only has 1 employer, et cetera, right? Because that's what we're talking about for any of the, you know, economically, you know, not super with it. We're just talking about 1 employer as opposed to like, at least in the labor market, that's what we're talking about.
In that study, it's not just 1 employer; it's like a spectrum, but it's usually like 1 to 2 at the bottom tercile.
Yeah. So yeah, when we say 1 in monopoly or 1 in monopsony, what we really mean is a majority of the market share. So it can be 1, 2, 3, but it means non-competitive, right? Like, there's not 100, 200 employers in your local area, right? Like, there's Walmart came into town and destroyed every mom and pop store that exists, and now Walmart pays everybody half of what they used to make at the local hardware store to work at fucking Walmart, and we're all happy because things are cheaper. You know, whatever. But sorry. And so, like, yeah, I mean, like, the question then would be like, well, why did this occur, and why does it seem to go in the face of the logic that we would be espoused in terms of an praxeological assumption that a minimum wage increase would do that. And what I would likely predict, if it is more than just, if it actually is a pattern, it is a thing, and it isn't just like some other variable came in at that. If I'm trying to understand what the other variable is, right? I mean, I would guess, again, I would have to go to like maybe potentially welfare things, or even more so, maybe there is like a cutoff for these programs. And so, you know, that has some effect. It'd be interesting to look at. I do want to read this study and learn. Oh shit, I like showed the whole thing. My bad. Not that there was anything bad there, but yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting. It would be interesting to look at it, right? For sure. I'll have to look at that research and get back to you on it. Because it is an interesting thing. Like, again, it just shows a historical fact. It doesn't show anything beyond that. But again, I'm also not saying that you're muted.
It's all good.
Oh, you're talking to fucking chat. Fuck you. Yeah,
I
no,
said
but
one
like,
thing.
it's fine. I'm just, hey chat, fuck you. But no, Yeah, again, it doesn't even if it, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm floundering because I'm looking for the right words here, but it's not like I'm like lost in the sauce or anything. It's just late. But yeah, no, I have no problem with recognizing that predictions of Austrian economics can sometimes be off, right? But the question is, and then the question then has to be why, because just like there can be confounding variables in empirical evidence, there can be confounding variables if you're assuming something to be true that isn't true, right? But through logically, like you'd have to be assuming A is true and it's not there.
I would love to have a debate between an Orthodox Marxist and an Austrian like you, because like, and this will be maybe the most debate bro-y thing I'll say. This sounds very much like Austrian economics or Marxism can't fail. It can only be failed. That like, yeah, its predictions might have been completely bunk, but maybe that's just because society was so complicated and all these weird variables we didn't consider. And sometimes that's fair, but like, when you're claiming to have something which explains the entire economy from pure logical observation, as a lot of Marxists like de facto do, they almost operate on presuppositionalist a priori logic, similar based on labor theory value and falling rate of profit.
Yeah,
I would love to have that.
I would love to see a Marxist get mad at me about empiricism in terms of falling rate of profit. Like, all right, bro, like, have you seen it ever? Have you ever seen it? Right.
It has.
No, look, like I understand. So there's this interesting thing, right? And this isn't me making like a deep economic argument. This is just outro-y, right? But there's this interesting thing where I do think that empiricism and consequentialism are very intuitive. They're the easiest things for anybody to adopt, right? Like without a doubt, because it just makes sense with the way that you view the world, right? Because you view the world as like, I don't want bad things to happen. I have these values of bad things and good things, and so I want to avoid the bad things. And so like that's how I derive my morality. And the same thing is true of economic data. But the problem is that you openly admitted multiple times that it isn't a truth claim, right? It's only a probabilistic truth claim. And then you said, and so I guess your goal then shifted. Interestingly enough, not at like attacking human action, because we kind of fell into the weeds on that, right? But instead at the predictability of something, the ability to actually tell the future and something. And so like, I would say, and I know this is going to sound so silly, like clip it and ship it, right? It's going to sound so silly, but Austrian economics can actually be right and be less predictable than empirical data sets, right? Like I would say that Austrian economics can use logic, and then people attempt to derive predictions. And those predictions are completely fucking wrong because they're utilizing a framework of things that aren't true, right? Which is to say that Austrian economics says, if A exists, then B happens, right? And then you kind of assume that A exists and A doesn't exist, right? Like we're not in a free market. Like A isn't a thing. Right. And the empiricist is taking in every data set and plugging them into more and more complicated models. And as those models get more and more complicated, and as AI is able to do things for us so that math becomes less tedious, because if anybody's ever done statistics, like in a research class in like grad school or something, you'll know that it's like, why can I not just do this in SPSS? And they're like, because you need to learn how to do it the right way first. And you're like,
that's
go
true.
Fuck
Everyone
yourself.
should learn how to use it in R. That's correct. That's true.
It's like, just let me plug it into SPSS, right? And so it's like, they get more and more complicated. So like, it wouldn't surprise me if we kind of get into this place where, just like AI with ChatGPT, where it's getting better than the average person on the street at giving you appropriate information, that empirical research is more accurate than logically derived things that actually can tell truth. But the problem is that those truths don't tell us enough about the complexities of the market. And neither does ChatGPT or empirical evidence, because it can't do so, but it becomes probabilistically pretty fucking accurate most of the time. So it's a very interesting kind of new world we're moving into.
I might just, so I was going to try and wrap it up. I'll just say as like a closing thought and then ask you for your closing and your shill and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I'm
like
just
embrace, embrace the inductive. Like I think that a very big thing for me has been rejecting the idea of absolute truths. There are very, very, very few things that I can think can be derived from first principles, and that rejecting that and embracing the empirics, embracing the inductive reasoning, embracing causal evidence will set you free from all the traps of having to defend a theory which cannot be failed. But I'll absolutely have your outro. Sorry for making it a little bit confrontational. And make sure to shout out where people can find you.
It's an ANCAP and a socialist talking together. The fact that neither of us screamed at each other in 3 hours is enough. All right, 3.5 hours.
Just a little.
Yeah. So
as a truth.
I mean, there's some interrupting, but there's none of that. Yeah. What I would say is that praxeology is the only form of science that can be utilized to derive truth in economics. That doesn't necessarily mean that it gives us as much information that we would want in the market. And so, I have no problem with Chicago School or, I think, modern monetary theory people are just fucking psychos. They're going to fucking watch the world burn with craziness. Like, just more GDP and we can fucking steal all the wealth. And, we can keep pumping trillions into the petrodollar and everything will be fine. We don't need green energy because we have GDP. They're crazy psychos. Don't listen to them. But in terms of Chicago School people and even some of the Keynesians and stuff, they have models that are interesting, that give us interesting ways of looking at things and tend to show patterns. And as technology and these models get better, we're going to see patterns that do have predictive power. And all the ANCAPs will get mad at me and say I'm horrible for saying that, right? But no, there's predictive power. The problem is that they're not true predictive power, because at any moment the foundation can be ripped from them because a variable that they're not aware of, that they didn't calculate for, changes because time changes. And there's a constancy problem that in economics, it is not a natural science. It does occur over time. There's subjectivism is a part of individual interactions in the market. I go to work and I see a hot dog stand at 9:00 in the morning and they're $3 and I go, that's fucking disgusting. Right. And then I go inside and I work until it's lunchtime and I come outside and I'm starving and that hot dog smell fucking hits my nose. And before I know it, I'm like, oh my God, only $3 for a hot dog. Right. And this is the thing, is that individuals in the marketplace radically change how they purchase, what they buy, what they want, what they do within hours. And so this idea that establishing historical facts shows truth is not true. But to be fair to SDL, he didn't claim that it was anything other than probabilistically true. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with saying, hey, this is likely true. We got a lot of evidence for this. I just think that, again, at any one moment, it could be radically changed and all of what we thought was true is untrue. And you can't untrue logic. You can't, things that are logically derived just are true. So I'm Fabian Liberty. Find me at Fabian Liberty on YouTube, etc. But yeah, empiricism is bad. Don't use empiricism in economics. All right. One last thing. And this is a really important thing, a small thing. I'll be quick. All right. I promise. I know that's probably a lot, but I'll try. Listen, the sneaky thing that they don't tell you about empiricism, this is the most important thing, is that it's through empiricism that you get to try all of the horrible, fascistic, socialist, murderous economic policies over and over and over again. Because when you realize that logically, minimum wage in a free market has a downward pressure on labor, right? And then all of a sudden you realize that it's stupid to get involved in that form of the market or to put price floors. But when you're the socialist and you have empiricism, every time they fail, every time people starve, every time they destroy the value of currency and cause massive amounts of inflation, they get to go, well, that actually isn't what happened. Or, oh, that variable you didn't account for. And it'll be different because we'll account for it this time. And that's the real problem with empiricism, is that because they know that it's only a guess at the truth, and it allows them to try ideological presuppositions that are against your rights, against freedom, against your liberty, and against your consent, that they get to rape you economically and from a governmental standpoint over and over and over again. And this is the philosophy that they use to justify those systems. And so you should run away from it at all costs.
I would just say as a closer, and then I'll end it. Thank you so much for coming on, Fabian. It was actually a pretty pleasurable 3.5-hour conversation about empiricism, the nature of epistemology, and economic schools. As a closer, I very much was inspired by Ernst Wigforss, who was the Swedish Social Democratic finance minister and one of the key theorists of the Swedish Social Democratic Party there, which did not, in fact, have many mass famines or mass sufferings of people and led to one of the most productive, happiest countries on earth. That all of life is an experiment, that nothing is sacred knowledge known from the very beginning, and that if we don't experiment, we will never make a society that pursues towards the goals we all want, a happier, healthier, more prosperous society for all. There is no truth but trying to build a better society by steps. So thank you again, Fabian.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Also, I'm sneaking. Define definition, bitch.
Bye.
Bye.